Alrighty, let's go ahead and get this bad boy on the road.
Yeah.
Hello, everybody, in all respective chats, and of course, any of you, if you want to co-stream, if you're not already doing so, please feel free. This is the first meeting of the Ministry of Science. This is going to be the Twitch stream feature where we have both scientists, other working professionals, academics, whomever we can find really to come together and have a collegial discussion about the state of science, politics in science, and how we can, do a myriad of things. Among them, radicalize the scientists, maybe, get our scientific institution in a more functional state than it is right now. So I'll maybe go ahead and start introducing everybody. I'll maybe go ahead and lead off, and then at least according to my stream, we could do Gremloe, Maddy, and then Nattyscience. So I think the three of you know me. My name is Marcus. I'm a PhD student, University of Vermont, currently in my third year, about halfway through. I study cellular and molecular biology. My research is in neuroscience, but I have 2 degrees in microbiology, hence the constant obsession over this new illness that dropped a couple of years ago. I'm also an avowed leftist, currently trying to organize some of the colleagues at my university into a graduate student union. And I think the political alignment of all of us is pretty similar in many respects. So you could go ahead and maybe include some of that in your introduction as well. Gremloe, you're up next.
Sure. Hi, I'm Gremloe. I'm a sociology student in Louisiana, and I stream on Twitch 6 days a week, it seems like now. We mostly cover news and politics through the sociological lens, and I'm currently about a year and a half, 2 years into my degree right now. Time is a flat circle. So, yeah, if you're interested in any of that, that's what we do every day.
Very nice. Maddy, you go ahead.
Yeah, hi, I'm Maddy. On Twitch, I am a politics streamer. I talk about politics, economics, the intersection of social justice and policy. But for my day job, I started out in marketing and made my way on over into working as a political consultant. And I also helped found a digital agency earlier this year called Ragtag, which you might see on my wall. And we help progressive campaigns win elections and do all sorts of fun digital things. So we're working with a number of congressional campaigns right now. And that's also probably why you have not seen as much of me on Twitch, because turns out congressional campaigns are really busy and require a lot of attention. So that's what I've been up to. And I'm really excited to be on a panel with honest to God scientists and people who understand this stuff. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Beautiful. All right. Natty, give me just a second. I want to show the stream your beautiful face. There's my window capture.
Sorry.
There we go. All right. You are off to the races. Go for it.
All right. I'm Nattyscience. Also here on Twitch. And just like Marcus, getting my PhD. I'm almost done though, which is another reason that I am also not on Twitch very much. And also I'm going to try some YouTube stuff as well. But yeah, just finishing up in biochemistry. So similar to Marcus, but more chemistry side, I would say, is usually what biochemists would do. And besides that, yeah, I'm a lot into politics. I don't talk politics much on my stream, and hence I have Nattyscience as my name because I'm a little bit worried, and maybe we could talk about that. I'm gonna go in industry, not in academia, is my plan, and I'm a little bit worried that if some company finds my stuff and is like, "Ooh, you're talking leftist stuff. Screw you. We're not gonna hire you," or something. So I tend to avoid it for now.
Hey, not a bad thought. If you're looking to go into industry, yeah, you really got to be careful because they will try and clap you for that. You're the kind of prototypical like venture capitalist types. All right, well, I'm probably need a little bit of time to unscuff Natty's video. Sorry, chat. All right, let's go ahead and actually get the discussion going so I can continue to do this. So I think we could, like Gremloe said, really launch into the foundation for this discussion of the intersection of politics and science. Earlier this week, the CDC made the guideline change heard around the world, where they basically told everybody, if you're 5 days into a case of COVID, you can leave quarantines, no questions asked. You just have to promise and pinky swear that you aren't going to spread it, which, scientifically speaking, pissed off pretty much every scientist that was not part of the government. So, I think we could maybe go around the horn both on a personal level and then maybe in terms of is this guidance kind of an insult to your intelligence level? Like, what was your reaction to that? Like, how did y'all feel when that kind of came down the pipeline?
Ooh, who wants to take that first?
I can
Anybody.
go first.
Okay.
I'll go first.
Do it.
I had a few different reactions to it because a good friend of mine who I met through organizing in the 2020 presidential election is a Seattle-based emergency room doctor. And she's big on Twitter, actually. It's pretty cool. But one of the things she mentioned, so for those who learned a little bit more about, like, the Delta CEO, Delta Airlines wrote a letter that was basically requesting that the CDC reduce the mandatory quarantine or isolation time from 10 days down to 5. And what I learned, because that on its own, when you see that headline, is, oh shit, no. It's, a little scary. But there are some things that weren't reported as clearly that I think are worthy of at least noting. Not that it excuses this, because I think we're all pretty sick of going on year 2 of a pandemic because people just can't get a goddamn vaccine or stay the fuck home. I'm sorry. Are we allowed to swear on this? Is it okay if I swear on this? Because I don't know.
Swearing is okay.
So...
If there are any academics who are lurking in the background, this is a lab meeting at a bar. Swearing and alcohol are okay.
Okay,
and no no cursing reward is being rejected. This is not happening tonight.
Yeah, this is
and
beers
guys, don't
from
worry.
beakers.
Yeah, and don't worry, I was one of you too. My master's is in economics, but then I was like, PhD. No, I'm not going to be a little smarty pants. So I'm the only person in my family, by the way, who does not have a PhD. So definitely never comes up. Yeah, never comes up.
So sorry.
So basically, the stipulation that maybe wasn't as widely reported was that the letter requested that the isolation time be only for people who have been vaccinated but tested positive for COVID. And then there's still testing protocol where, they would have to go through a series of rapid tests and regular to confirm that there's no longer enough of a trace of COVID in their system to show up on a test. So it's okay, maybe I could see that that's a bit more reasonable than just a blanket, 5 days, no matter what. However, the way we have handled this pandemic so far does not elicit a lot of confidence in how potentially we can loosen restrictions in any capacity. And what made me even more frustrated was that this was a decision made and the rationale given by the Delta CEO, it was purely economic. He's just well, it's going to affect our workforce. Well, yeah, dude, you're in a pandemic. It's going to affect your workforce.
Yep.
So that's sort of how I feel. At first I was outraged, but then I got a little bit more context and it's okay, I could understand the basis for that. However, given our track record, I don't think it was the right call by any measure.
Gremloe, go ahead.
Okay, well, I think Maddy pretty much covered everything, but if I'm going to take a really hardline leftist stance on this, it is just another illustration of the outsized amount of power that, corporations and the wealthy have over these institutions. And if there was a shaky amount of confidence that the American public, be it a third to 50%, of the voting base that didn't trust the CDC, this doesn't help to instill any measure of confidence in this institution. and unironically hurts the science, because now people who were anti-vax are going to say, oh, well, you know, we're trusting the science. The CDC says that we can now, you know, 5 days is good. But it's, you know, like Maddy said, it's economic based. It's not science based. It's not there to protect people. It's literally just there at the behest of, you know, companies like Delta. And it sucks. It's not where we should be. And, you know, I would prefer us taking a more cautious approach when a new variant is entering the country and, you know, is as rapid as it is.
All right, Natty, go ahead.
Yeah. So I'm not nearly as kept up on the COVID stuff as Marcus. So
That's okay.
I'm more, I guess, layman. But so I saw Fauci talking about it on TV, and he's like, "Oh, most of it, you know, most of the transmissions in the first few days." And I was like, "Oh, okay. Well, if that's true, then that's reasonable." And then I went and I saw Marcus's stream, and I started to do some digging, and yeah, I found out there is no data at all except their computer model that they made up. So then I was mad. At first, I was like, "Okay, I'll trust you, and you know, I'd like to see the data." And then when I looked for it, I was mad. Also, I mean, you two wrapped it up very nicely. I would like to point out that that Delta, the CEO, his thing was much more stricter than what the CDC said. He said that only for vaccinated people, and the CDC's guidelines are vaccinated or unvaccinated. Doesn't matter. 5 days. If your symptoms are resolving, whatever that means, even, then you're fine. No testing. So it's bad.
Right,
No
they
data.
asked for one thing, and then the CDC's like, "Oh, great, we'll give you that plus all this shit no one else needs that's like not rooted in science." And yeah, and and me and Fauci are in a fight right now. He knows it. He knows why.
Can't believe you would attack an Italian man like this.
Hey, we're doing freedophobia over
Yeah,
here.
what ugats?
What's the matter, you?
Yeah, marron.
No gabagool for you this
Yeah.
Christmas, Tony.
I'm ethnically French, so we believe have a pretty contentious history, but we both love wine.
Yeah, so I mean, I think you guys really hit the nail on the head on like 3 separate heads, I should say. You hit the nail on the head from 3 separate angles. Anyways, I'm gonna scrap that. That was not coming out right.
No,
Look,
you nailed it. That was great.
You know, I think at this point, what there is to say that really hasn't been said is kind of more of an open-ended question. You know, why would the CDC, one, an institution that is very much like venerated and respected by most, and two, an institution that is comprised of scientists, kind of do something really, you know, superficially scummy? Like I kind of expect this from a used car salesman, not the CDC of all entities. So, you know, what do we think their motivations are? You know, is it the director of the CDC's, you know, getting some sort of corporate kickback? Is this, you know, a greater pressure from the Biden administration to get people back to work that, you know, they kind of timed properly with this Delta letter? You know, how nefarious really is this? Is this incompetence? You know, at least personally, I kind of seem to think that it's more of a, we've struggled to really control COVID so far, so we're just gonna kind of give up and just try and get people back to work and function best we can. That it's not a take supported by science, but I think that's a take supported by their inability to actually control the disease, like the name of their institution actually says.
I would agree with you 100%. I mean, and it's shocking because, you know, when we elected Biden, the idea was that it was going to be a significant departure from what we had experienced under the Trump administration, and that finally we were going to believe science again. We were going to follow the science and make informed decisions in terms of policy based on that. And then to see a lot of the Biden administration, and especially the CDC under his guidance, basically sort of carry on similarly, except the only difference, and I'm being generalizing here, but like the only difference I can see is just their verb, like their rhetoric around getting vaccinated, or like, hey, wear a mask. Because the Biden or the Trump administration like wasn't as explicit about that. But beyond that, it's been a little frustrating, you know. As someone who works in electoral politics, having all of that going into an election year, is really daunting, because that's not going to be a great story to sell into voters as for why they should, not only if they're in a blue district, keep their current representatives, but then if they aren't, they should, have someone else come into power, because I think a lot of voters are going to say, why? Nothing's changed.
Well, that is the usual shtick, isn't it? Republican gets into power, mucks everything up. Democrats come in to, salvage the situation, kind of, milquetoast response to whatever crises is happening, in the aftermath of a Republican presidency. And those underlying issues are still there, no matter who's in power, because it's all based on profit. This move by the CDC, I don't know if this is an issue with them hoping that the discussion between the Delta CEO and them was going to come out, and they just pulled the trigger on it and the story leaked. But this is just an example of, the Democrats, whenever they're empowered, it's not a matter of fundamentally shifting the dynamics of power from Republican to Democrat and fixing the things that need to be fixed. It's just kind of put a Band-Aid over it. We rainbow capitalism our way through the next 4 years. And if we lose, well, look, we're still better than the Republicans. So, round and round we go. And, 900,000 dead Americans later, here we are.
Oh, you're being optimistic with 900,000.
Well,
God. Yeah, you have to question the quality of the data sets that we're pulling in those numbers from. But also, I think what I've wanted to do, and I haven't had the time to do anything like that, and I don't know where I would even pull these numbers. I have a few ideas, but I wanted to model out
the term I was looking for. Thank you.
If it is economically a better decision in like the short and long term to relax regulations, if the fallout from those laxing of regulations means that the pandemic itself was extended. I thought about this because I was looking at some country specific data. Originally it was on the rebound, so the economic recovery after that initial plummet from COVID, and looking at, okay, well, let's see who actually did a good job of not only recovering economically, but also kind of weathering the storm where the majority of their citizens are in decent shape. And then how does that correspond to the COVID-based restrictions and policy that they put in place, health ordinances, whatever. I wanted to model this out because, we know what the story would say. It's that you prolong the pandemic when you relax regulations and restrictions before we are actually in a position to be able to move forward. Like, the pandemic's not good for business. It will continue to not be good for business. And the airlines in particular should know that. So this to me, and this is the story of capitalism, right? Is that it's all about that short term. We just got to hit our quarterly earnings target, and then it's all fine. And it's really frustrating, especially as someone who has studied economics and is like, that is a short-term solution. It is a Band-Aid on a broken leg, and it's not going to work.
And it's self-defeating too, because if you believe that like labor is a commodity, then you're already like going out and cutting the legs out from underneath your own business and just saying, okay, well, don't worry about whether or not you're still symptomatic or if you're still like testing positive. Like if you're coughing all over people's burgles, it's fine because we still have a labor pool. And that sucks. Like, that's not how we should be approaching this. Like, we know the solutions. We just don't have the political will to do it. We need to lock down again, mass vaccination, mandatory vaccine passports. Everybody's got to get vaxxed. And that is just not feasible. Pay people to be home? Are you kidding? We already did that. Trump did that. We're the Democrats. We're not going to do what Trump did. And especially leading up to the primaries. Like, that is just unfeasible, especially already failing on campaign promises.
Yeah, and what both of you said actually dovetails really well. I'm going to drop some spicy new data in chat so y'all can take a look at that. It's
We
data from
love
the
data.
International Monetary Fund that models exactly, Maddy, what you were asking, looking at the impact of lockdowns and social distancing on the economy. And interestingly enough, it actually compares what happens if the amount of virus is allowed to double once, which is basically like one, infectious cycle. Like when the virus copies itself once, you get case counts increasing by one transmission's worth, basically, how that also impacts the economy. And when you think about it, that process is just happening over and over and over and over and over again to millions of cases and almost a million deaths, at least in this country. So they tend to have they being lockdowns and distancing versus allowing the virus to go through one cycle of transmission. They have identical economic impacts. But what you don't see in that graph is the economic impact of allowing the virus to do that constantly. So you can just take that and multiply it by a very large number that we don't even know to really get an idea of, this is really not going to be good for that quarterly earnings target. It's not going to be good for Wall Street. It's not going to be good for everybody's 401ks. This is not going to be a meaningful set of policy to do what we're doing right now, or ask the CDC to, like you said, Gremloe, take a baseball bat and Nancy Kerrigan out the workforce from the ice rink. Like there's going to be nobody to hand out snacks and drinks on a plane or fly them, or nobody in the hospitals to take care of all the people that we're just allowing to get sick.
Yeah, especially when we're not a productive economy, when we are kind of a consumer treat economy, as some people call it, when we're not actually engaging in production and we're constantly engaging in like consumer service, outside of very small sectors, like that's not ideal for a pandemic scenario. Like production is where you like want the forces to stay productive, like while doing, spread mitigation. But in areas where it's not that, those people can't work during a pandemic and they have to be basically subsidized by the government. That is the fundamental role of the government, is ensuring the health, longevity, and security of this country. And this, whether or not people want to acknowledge it, is a national security issue as well, not just of a public health issue. It's national security. We're so vulnerable to these kinds of issues now, and it's very evident at this point.
So speaking of demographics that don't want to acknowledge it, and I think all of you could probably attest to this to some degree, but since me and Natty are among the folks who have tortured ourselves with long, prolonged stays in academia, academics and scientists generally tend to be populations of people that are traditionally unwilling to acknowledge a lot of these things. They're generally viewed as these, erudite nerds or scholars, sitting in the corner with a pair of black framed glasses, the pocket protector with all the pens, and they're just there to provide facts on demand at the behest of capital or other, incredibly powerful entities. So I guess with that being said, this kind of manifests with people like the one and the only Tony Fauci saying things like, I'm an apolitical scientist, and then defending the current CDC guideline change the next breath. So I guess all of that to say, like, is this kind of consistent with your guys' experience? Does this demographic of people really try to stay out of politics? Are they apolitical? And if so, how can we start to bring them into this kind of a conversation that we're having right now?
Anyone want to take that?
I mean, I talk way too much, but I'll like try to make it short. I think the idea that, I don't know, I used to be one of those people where it's like you believe that someone can be fiscally conservative but like socially liberal, and you see them as like divorced from each other. They're in separate boxes. I think we're starting to see that in just about every area of life, including science, including what is like funded for research, what gets priority, it's all political. So the notion that someone can be apolitical, I think what that is transforming into more nowadays is it's because we're in a highly polarized media situation. And so if they're to just give their opinion, if it aligns with either side's, talking points or whatever they're trying to push, then that's great. If it doesn't, if it goes against them, then they're going to be labeled a shill. They're going to be labeled like it's going to be discarded because facts don't matter anymore. So I think I'm hoping that more scientists sort of recognize that their work, what they choose to report, how they choose to frame data, it's all political because it influences people's lives and is largely dictated by policy.
Yeah,
That's a solid point.
Yeah, I totally agree. We talked about this a little bit the other day in kind of preparation for this. There is a conflation with the idea of this Republicans are turning mass into a political issue. Everything is political, and this notion that anything, especially like when it comes to like organizations and governmental bodies and political actors, that they can be somehow morally or politically neutral is absurd. And the sooner we like do away with this old notion, the better. It's not necessarily that they're being political, it's that they're politically motivated. They have interests that are aligning, whether they realize it or not, with one ideology or political leaning, or another. And I think intention of calling something political is to act as a stopgap measure to any kind of real policy initiatives or progress in either direction.
Yeah, so that almost raises a question of how we delineate between intrinsically political and partisan. Because I think when people are saying, Republicans are making mass a political issue, I think what they mean is they're engaging in a partisan culture war around the issue and making it more of a political identity rather than a piece of fabric that is supposed to keep you alive.
Right.
So they can acknowledge, the intrinsic nature of having to craft policy around said piece of fabric and how we go about doing that. The people that comprise regulatory bodies like the CDC, they're pretty typical, a bunch of old white dudes, they're scholarly scientists and they're largely reflective of a lot of people in science. But at the same time, they, as Natty posted, behind the scenes for those of you at home, we had some data that was from 2009, I think. It was the Pew Research Center looked at the political leanings of scientists and how scientists perceived their own political leanings. And generally speaking, scientists are thought of by the public, again, kind of as that, apolitical, neutral entity, where scientists overwhelmingly tend to view themselves as just like libs, like a bunch of Joe Biden, Hillary Clinton voting libs. I think there was only 14% that said very liberal, which I think would probably be our neck of the woods. So
9% said conservative.
Well, I have a question.
Wow.
And is that hold consistent across like age demographics, or does they what's the variance there? Because I would imagine in like the era of Reaganism, boomers, that generation, like it was, I don't know, Reagan was so popular. I think like he poisoned politics in the United States for a long time. And I've seen it with my own parents, but like,
Reagan.
I wonder, fucking Reagan, Ronald. I
started it.
But it makes me wonder, right? I'm like, I wonder if there's a shift in demographic, or at least, I don't know. I just wonder if it mirrors what we're seeing hold true across like broader, just age-based, like demographic, political ideologies and leanings. Something to think about.
I don't think it said anything about age or demographics, if I remember. It's also from 2009, so it's a bit old.
Yeah.
My anecdotal experience would be that Marcus and I, the youngins, would be more left, and then the professors are just libs, like neoliberals. So
this also
that tends to
exists
be the
in
case.
Academia, right? Like the
as a
more educated you are, like the longer you stay within academia, the more lib left you kind of are, just as a consequence of being more educated, right?
Yeah, that's the meme. Facts have a liberal bias.
Right.
What was that? That was from Stephen Colbert's White House Correspondents' Dinner thing, where he's like, and we all know reality has a liberal bias.
Yeah.
But I believe that. Well, also, if you think about it, that was back, especially if they're tenured professors, they're living pretty comfortable lives. And so maybe once they get a bit of distance between them and like really struggling, it warps how their perspective and their outlook on the world and what types of policy or ideology they subscribe to. So
yeah,
I think that's interesting.
There is a kind of Marxist analysis of that as you transcend your class position, you start to view your previous class position as opposition to, you know, your progress, the kick the ladder out from underneath you, crabs in a bucket mentality that we kind of see people, you know, even in the regular like working class positions. You know, once you've gone from making $30,000 a year to making an easy $50,000 a year, you start to see people as welfare queens, and you know, you don't really want to have to pay higher taxes because you just got a brand new Ford F-350, and you know you don't want to have to pay extra, you know, insurance and taxes on your new 3-bedroom 2-bath.
Gotta roll some coal, brother.
Yeah, that's right.
I guess for me, it's like, I guess for me, I mean, my journey was different, but I totally believe that because I've like seen it happen in real time. But like, as I moved up and was able to make more money, I used to work at Google and like was doing great. I couldn't help but think, I'm like, I worked harder my first year in the workforce by like working, like hauling ass and like desperately trying to prove myself and taking on all this fucking extra work and got paid nothing for it. And there are so many people that like do that and they don't have the like privilege or benefits that I do, where I was able to go to college. I was able to graduate without student loans, where I have like a family who is a like, you know, I could fall back on should I need it. And it's like, so I can't help but think as I've like, you know, grown and been able to earn more money, it makes me all the more determined to rectify this like gross inequality we see in our society. Because I'm just like, I'm not fucking special. There's so many people out there who would do like just as good a job as me. They would bring a different perspective, and yet they have all these barriers that are not their fault. And like, they should be able to enjoy the same advantages and privileges that I did. You know, that's like, so I think to myself, okay, well then what, from a structural standpoint, from a policy standpoint, can we implement to make up for that like deficit? I think of it like, you know, in a graph where it's like, here's where I am, here's where they are. What can we do to close that gap? So, and it breaks my heart when people go the complete opposite, where they start to think as like, oh no, those are just the people we don't talk about because I did it and I worked hard. So don't punish me for being successful. And it's like,
yeah, the cult of rugged individualism.
Oh my God. Yes.
Well, that manifests in science too.
Oh yeah.
Natty, you could absolutely talk about this. Like,
oh yeah.
Really?
You know, surprise, surprise. I know, big shocker. But like, I think that the publisher perish, like researchers have to, you know, constantly bring in grant money. Otherwise they don't have the ability to like have a tenure track professor job, and then their lab goes under. Fun fact, not so fun fact, the co-inventor of, I shouldn't say all mRNA vaccines, the seminal discovery as to why we can use mRNA for vaccines right now is because of one researcher who fell into that trap. Her career was going to end at the University of Pennsylvania when she was trying to research how we could use this technology in the first place. Her university basically called her stupid. They shut down her lab. They demoted her, and she was about to like quit academia to go like take care of her husband back in Hungary, who I think was undergoing a cancer scare at the time. And then a collaborator like stepped in as like, hey, like, let's work on this together. Let's like lift each other up. Let's actually figure this problem out. And then they actually like cracked the code, which was like the fundamental discovery that allowed us to use mRNA as a vaccine in the first place. But all of that to say, like, the higher order point is that even scientists get cast into that culture of rugged American individualism. Our entire training is basically how you can be this standalone galaxy brain with 500 IQ who can crack some sort of magical code and write a grant that will get the government to give you a blank check so you can, you know, cure a disease or some shit. When in reality, Maddy, you put it perfectly. Like, I've seen so many times, it really breaks my heart to see really smart, intelligent scientists who went through the same training just get screwed over by the grant process. They don't get money. Their ideas are equally as valid. And we miss out on, you know, automated, fully luxury gay space communism practically because of it.
That's all I want. I want Star Trek gay space communism.
Yeah. I want those gender neutral outfits where like the men have the skirts, but they're like just above the knee, you know, a little tasteful.
Oh my God, I'm all for this.
Okay, so wait, before we go into this, a little meme. Deep Space Nine or Next Generation?
Deep Space Nine.
Very good. Very good. Acceptable.
No.
My friend
I'll blend in
Yvette.
and say Deep Space Nine.
Yeah. My friend Yvette, who some of you know on Twitter as Afro Sabi, named her dog after Jadzia Dax. Her dog's name is Jadzia Dax. We've talked about
That's fucking cool. All right, I think we can maybe like bring it back to something someone said in chat. This is a really salient point. Actually, I'll say two things. Number one, with the whole like publisher Paris situation, universities actively like take money from scientists too. So they like to fund their pet projects and deprive scientists of their hard-earned grant money, even when they do get it. So that's worth mentioning. But two, you know, when we were talking about how scientists sort of self-identify politically, it kind of raises a question: how accurate is that actual data, regardless of how out of date or not it is? You know, are a lot of academics in positions of power or prominence where if they really speak their mind, they're going to face retribution or consequences? You know, are there people who are, you know, hiding their power level, so to speak, as the political meme community tends to describe it? You know, is that is that a thing that we think scientists have to do? Natty, have you like seen any of that? Or like if you have a one-on-one conversation with your advisor, for example, you know, are they going to say one thing and then when they're in front of a committee, they say something entirely different?
I mean, I think that's definitely the case, that people will say, that's probably the case everywhere, right? People in front of other people will say one thing, and then when they're by themselves will say a different thing. Especially with, I mean, it's good, obviously, but like the push in college for diversity and stuff, you know, people feel like sometimes professors feel like they're forced into doing diversity, and they personally might be like, oh, I don't like this. But I don't know, anecdotally still, I feel like most people in science are like liberal neolibs. Like, even if you talk to them personally, there'll be more neolibs. Maybe I mean, everybody's racist, right? They've, you know, on a not systematic level, a lot of people have, you know, stereotypes and stuff. Those sorts of things, but overall are generally neolibs. But that's all anecdotes. I don't know. I feel like the data is really lacking, and maybe with this whole like COVID thing, maybe scientists are more like in the spotlight. Maybe people will look into this stuff more. It'd be very interesting to see.
That, I love that. Yeah, I would love to see a comparison of if they were able to get a similar sample group and test the same exact questions and opinions after everything we've gone through. Because I mean, 2009 feels like a lifetime ago, and a lot has changed. Yeah,
like we've suffered so much since then.
Yeah, I was wide-eyed and bushy-tailed. I didn't have gray hair yet. You know, it's been some time. And we've like our country's political spectrum has evolved, and I mean, so much has changed. So I would be fascinated to see, because I could only imagine that given, and this is only speaking really to the last like 5 or 6 years, I can't even imagine how it must feel for scientists to have what they would maybe consider is universal, like scientific consensus, be tossed aside and questioned by conservative talk radio hosts, and then that being taken as gospel by a decent swath of the population. I think that will do the radicalization that I would love to be able to do without the harm, because I can't even imagine. I mean, you guys probably know better than anyone, having watched the response to this current pandemic. I can't even imagine how frustrating that must be from a scientific standpoint.
Well, and even then, like there are tons of scientists who have just, I guess, for lack of a better term, they've showed their ass on Twitter and news media appearances as what I like to call science chuds. They're basically outing themselves as oh God, Eric Feigl-Ding, don't get me started. Just catch Andy. You know, if you've ever seen that guy on Twitter, here, just in a side note, we brought him up. The dude literally just takes data from other scientists and like tweets it out as if it's his own, and then like draws an MS Paint over it and like circles like this p-value or this finding, and he's like, oh, look here, big finding. And then half the time he's like wrong about that anyways. So that's just one example of many scientists who have joined sort of the chud intelligentsia, for lack of a better way to put it, where they have started, pushing horse paste for Patreon subscribers, Brett Weinstein, or started pushing anti-vax sentiment entirely to, sell vitamins. There are a lot of people with degrees, with MDs, with PhDs, any master's degrees you could really think of, who have now started to do that. So with that, reassessment of political alignment, I'd almost be curious to see if there's an uptick in the amount of self-reported conservatives, because we've essentially polarized. We've moved basically to one end of the dance floor or the other. And I'm curious to see how many people are on either end, because I think what we will probably continue to talk about here is how we take one end of the dance floor and try to make the move even farther left than where they are all huddled right now.
Yeah. I think, and this is just kind of a brief aside, that we kind of need to take a more aggressive approach within academia to dispel people and eject them from, the main, circles of influence that, like the UK did with the progenitor of the vaccines cause autism panic. Originally started in the UK, literally exiled, now lives in Austin in a mega compound. That seems like something we should at least think about, maybe on the table as a treat.
Exiling the anti-vaxxers as a treat? Is that your proposition?
Well, yes.
Or at least the prominent ones, the ones with the megaphones or the sandwich boards claiming the vaccines will end the world.
Yeah, don't make me break out my Florida annexation plan graphic.
I keep saying sell it back to Spain. Sorry.
Spain. I wish. I mean, I think they do at least kind of, but maybe it's like a cultural thing too, where like in the UK, it's just, as a society, they're like, get away. Whereas here, like, they're like, okay, you're no longer in academia, but, we still accept you. I don't know.
Unless you're talking about the biological inherent differences between men and women, then you're totally fine.
Yeah, true. Okay, it's a selective thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There was one quick thing I wanted to bring up, since we were talking about kind of like the influence briefly like 10 minutes ago about like once we start seeing academics, achieve like more wealth for themselves, maybe a book deal, whatever. In some of the material that Marcus had sent us, there is an interesting article from libcom.org that has a piece about the commodification of science. And just one little excerpt from it is, it has drowned the most heavenly ecstasies of religious fervor, chivalrous enthusiasm, Philistine sentimentalism, and the icy water of egotistical self-calculation, which I think is an interesting, like, kind of keyhole view into that world of once we have started, like, commodifying and putting a price tag on science.
Yeah, and that was from the late Richard Lewontin, one of the only like openly Marxist biologists that I've ever even heard of. I will also recommend to anybody listening, his book, The Dialectical Biologist, is very, very good. It actually will empower you to fight back against a lot of the race realists that are existing both online and even here on Twitch. It'll tell you how to address a lot of the shit that they say. But besides the point, what he kind of describes more in his like broader thinking about science and his perspective from his time, like the late 80s, was a big shift in how scientists perceive themselves and how they become more proletarianized as our capitalistic organization of the economy really started to kick in after the Reagan era, right? Science was viewed as this very like noble enterprise where you're a servant of the public. You're working, you're dedicating your life to understanding this very niche thing for the good of everybody else. When you read that passage, Gremloe, it kind of really made me think about how a lot of the people that I've talked to, at least anecdotally, in my program, for example, they're here to try and patent something. They want to make money. They want to go work in industry to be part of some biotech company that's going to get bought by Merck or something like that. Their interest is really no longer in the niche parts of, microbiology or biochemistry or something like that, but rather profiteering. And it's almost very insidious, right? We're supposed to be trained to be this, noble entity. And historically, that was the thing that could move you upwards in terms of class mobility. You would be moved into sort of the professional managerial class or even into the bourgeoisie if you were, that amazing of a scientist. But now it kind of feels like, Natty kind of described it pretty perfectly while we were waiting for Maddy, right? We're basically just trying to keep our heads above water, trying to get a living wage. We're trying to, even sell our souls to a pharmaceutical company. It means we can eat. Like, no longer is science this noble entity that people really make it out to be. And I think that's a feeling that people really don't get because, like you said, Gremloe, it's a keyhole view. Like, there's a door and people can't see through it. And that passage from Lewontin gave you that view through the keyhole.
Yeah.
And go ahead, Natty. Go ahead.
I was just going to say earlier that a lot of the problems we have, I think, are brought upon ourselves in the science world. I mean, scientists. I don't know when it started or if it's, like the general American society where kind of Reagan started it with the whole moving rightward and more capitalist sort of stuff. But science is like its own little capitalist world, like the publisher perish stuff. There's another thing I was going to bring up, but it's like lack of communication. That's what it was. Like, there's no incentive to communicate with the public. You don't get money for doing that, really. I guess there's some now, and they're getting better at it, but it's not much of a thing, nearly as much. It's all about, what can you produce, like innovation and stuff, not, just doing learning. That's what university is supposed to be, but it's less and less so. It's like a big capitalist kind of world we built that's like different. And like, not only is it like more capitalist probably than it used to be, like, but it's also like shut off because like most people don't know what we do or how we do it or how the science world works or anything. So it's a weird place that has a lot of problems, which is why I don't want to be in academia.
Right.
Well, I mean, this is, sorry, really quickly.
No, go ahead.
This is like anything under capitalism, right? Like that story can be replicated pretty much across every single discipline without the sort of unique position that being a scientist or a researcher played, because as you eloquently pointed out, it was seen as this noble profession, this sort of apolitical noble thing where they're in search of the truth. The problem is that when you're operating under a capitalist system, oh my God, floofy dog. Sorry. Oh, so cute.
I'm sorry.
Oh, such a little floof. Is it a little Pomeranian?
Yeah.
Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I will finish. I think this is just endemic of what happens under a capitalist society is that everything gets commodified. Everything gets a price tag. And if you are wealthy and well-connected, then you can pretty much do whatever kind of research you want because you will have the funding to see it through. And the funding is going to be largely based on profitability and not actual need or like larger contribution to the scientific community.
Yeah, well, I kind of wanted to bring up, unfortunately, Professor Q wasn't able to come onto this show, but one of the things that he wanted to talk to us about, and I had done like a little discussion with him the other day, was that journal editors are the most powerful, I'm just quoting from his little thing in the message here, the most powerful persons in academia. They determine what gets published, can directly kill an article either via desk or reject by sending it to harsh reviewers. This is important because you get tenure based on article publications. Yeah, I mean, I think we can, like many problems within contemporary American society, bring it back to the Reagan era and the destruction of labor unions, particularly within academia. Big shout out, just as an aside, to my friend John, who is an academic at LSU, who's trying to form a teachers union. That kind of protection within the industry, which academia is an industry, that kind of protection just to make sure that good publications, good study, good finding is, brought to the public and not gate-kept by someone who undoubtedly has their own political and material interests.
Yeah, like that's such a double-edged sword, like what Professor Q said, right? Journal editors are some of the most powerful people. Like there's a lot of truth in that,
Hmm.
especially with sort of the old-timey good old boys club that science has often been, right? Where, certain research groups are looking to maintain sort of a grasp on a particular field, and they kind of strong arm some of the up and coming researchers in their research groups out of the way, possibly to get a patent on something or sell it, or to beat them to the punch, so that way they can get the accolades or the money that comes with the Nobel Prize or something like that. But at the same time, even in recent times, publications themselves have become a commodity, to the point where we now have predatory publishing as like an entity, which are random journals that will essentially publish any piece of hot garbage they can find, because scientists actually have to pay to publish. Like, as a scientist, if you have something that you did, you're not allowed to just walk up to a journal and say, please insert my research into your journal. You have to pay them like thousands of dollars for them to actually do that, right? They say it's for maintaining their research archive in their journal, and their expenses to do all of that and to kind of curate it, pay the editors, stuff like that. But it's created this cottage industry of telemarketer style solicitation for scientist data to charge them an arm and a leg, and then they steal it and spread it to everybody, and sometimes people lose out on entire pathways of research because of it.
Yeah.
So all that to say, like, not only are the editors powerful, but depending on what they preside over, the journal itself also carries a lot of power with it, because it's a source of revenue.
Yeah.
And there's
No, and
this.
sorry,
I'm
go
sorry.
for it. You're the scientist. I don't know.
I was just gonna say quickly. Quick point. There's this, in my opinion, arbitrary kind of hierarchy of journals. So like Science, Nature, if you've heard of those journals, are like the top journals. So people have this like just sense. So it's like a culture of, oh, if you have a science paper, you did really, really good science. And in my opinion, a lot of it's arbitrary, but that's like leads to a lot of politics and that sort of stuff. Where it's like you got to get in these journals because these ones are better than the other ones.
Do those journals make so when you're submitting a paper or you're submitting something to a scientific journal, like it makes me wonder, obviously they're going to question or evaluate whether or not it should be published based on if you are able to deliver like a compelling result, or there's like a good like story there. But like, are they transparent about the criteria with which they evaluate submissions?
No, and that's why Professor Q says the editors are very powerful, because it really depends on, a lot of the time, like depending on your area of research, like who the editor is. Because some areas are so small, you'll like know them. They'll be like, this dude you saw at a conference, like you met him, you swapped some ideas over a couple of drinks, and now you're submitting all your research to him, months later. Some areas of research are that small, but other areas are so large and encompassing that you just have no idea who the editor is, and it's just like a black box. Like, Natty, you've just went through the experience. I've published twice. Like, you submit it and then you just hear nothing. Like, it's radio silence. You don't know what they want until they tell you. And sometimes they say, what you have to do is months worth of experiments and to like go away. There's a meme about reviewer experiments. I think it's reviewer number 2 is always the asshole who tells you, you have to go do another year's worth of work before they'll even consider you. And they like tell you, but after the fact, not before.
And this exists in the social sciences as well. Professor Q linked a bunch of his articles that were gatekept behind an editor that were very interesting, that I, am trying to parse through right now when it comes to like interactions on social networks in regards to like racism and sex. Like, these are things that are important for like our culture and moving forward, and that we need to, as scientists, whether we're in the hard sciences or the soft sciences, we need to, be privy to, but are being gatekept behind people who don't think these things are issues.
Totally. God, I mean, but one of the best pieces of advice I got, especially when dealing with people in politics, because you're encountering people from every different type of background, but you still want and need their support. And when someone gives you an emotional response to something, you can't reason someone out of a position they didn't reason themselves into. And I know, like, especially for us who we have spent time, I mean, you guys are still in academia, I've spent time in academia, learning that lesson and internalizing it is really, really fucking hard. And I still don't have a great answer for, okay, well then how do we make people care? I mean, unfortunately, the answer I've found, or that I've kind of gravitated towards, and this was based on a book called Merge Left, which is good if you're looking to like learn more about how to influence people in politics, is making it a question of economics and making the economic argument for why they should vote one way or the other, why they should care about something. Because at the end of the day, people want to know, how does this affect me? How does this make my life different? But if they are completely divorced from reality, I mean, you're trying to convince them that Wonderland doesn't exist. And how do you do that?
Well, this
Yeah,
is
that's a
actually
tough
a
sell.
good.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Marcus. Go ahead.
No. You can
Well,
go
I was
ahead.
going to say that this is a good like lead into like the main topic of like how do we get people within science, within academia, to recognize the biases that they have and like their peers have, and understand that what they do is inherently political. And it kind of goes the same with like what I try and do on my broadcast, is like make people recognize that their biases and their political leanings are based on their material interests, that they're trying to put a roof over their head and like, food on the table. That's your material interest, and getting them to recognize that everyone's material interests are in your interest. When your neighbor is doing good, you're doing good. When you're doing good, your neighbor's doing good. That kind of like mentality is really difficult to instill in people when we have this rugged individualism just so deeply ingrained in our culture, that breaking people out of that sometimes it's just a matter of either appealing to, common interest, or just through empathy. Like healthcare is a big one that most people, when you sit them down and say, that you're getting screwed by your insurance company, you're already paying into an insurance pool and you're not getting a lot out of it. This is a path that we have evidence that it works better. And just bringing that evidence forward and then appealing to their interest and their empathy, I think is the best way that we can kind of de-radicalize people.
Yeah, so like even if we're talking about scientists, and again this goes back to that outdated data, like they're starting not necessarily from a place of extreme conservative radicalization where they walk into a laboratory and are wanting to discover something, but only for people that make $90,000 or higher a year. Like they're generally doing it in that old spirit of nobility, right? They want to do something good for people. Their base interest is going into science to help people or to contribute to knowledge, to be part of this long-standing venerated institution. But that's kind of where it stops. Like, at least anecdotally, when I've had conversations with other grad students, for example, trying to convince them that forming a labor union and actually giving us some protections is a good idea. Yeah, I mean, it goes back to the economic argument, right? We make shit wages. We're mostly below the poverty line. We don't get very much in the way of health insurance or other benefits. Like, the list goes on. But it almost seems like one of the difficulties I've encountered in having these conversations is that almost feels like that's the first like crack in the wall. Like, that's the first crack in the brick wall, but it's not enough to like bust through it like the Kool-Aid man. Like, what's the follow-up? Like, once you introduce all of those economic talking points, it's good for you if your colleagues are doing good, if they're making money, if they're able to pull in money to do research, because that means there's more money in the pool for you to get when you write a grant, right? You can phrase it like that, but beyond that, like, what do we say?
I think for me, at least, one thing, and you touched on this a little bit, is that when you're dealing with people who have any sort of academic background, especially in science, and again, generalization, but they are typically people who are intellectually curious. They are curious. So you give them something to chew on, and they're going to follow that trail. They're going to want to learn more. And I think one thing, I mean, this is over a long period of time, but one way I've been able to move like my own family to, much further to the left is a lot of it's like planting seeds. Because even when you're gone, when they don't think about you, or your interaction's over, that seed is going to be there, and they're going to think about it, and they're going to do research. And it's the same way when you're like canvassing or engaging with voters, where there's certain prodding questions that feel very casual, but they help uncover what things are important to that person, and really what their desired outcome is with policy. So for like whether it's getting a more streamlined process to secure funding for research, a more transparent system of criteria with which they're being evaluated when they're submitting papers, or adjusting the tenure qualification system so that it accounts for these very sort of vague things where, okay, if you're published a bunch because you know an editor, great, but does that mean that you are the most qualified for this like tenured position? Like these are things that maybe they can start to think about, and then you keep it going. I think people sometimes have this idea that all of a sudden it's going to be this epiphany moment and someone wakes up and is like, oh, I see everything differently now. And that's, I mean, if we want to talk about science, that's not how psychology works. That's not how decision making and that's just not how it works like neurologically. It's the little moments that plant those seeds, that nurture those seeds, allow them to grow in aggregate. So I would say for folks in the scientific community, it would be mirroring what we do in other areas, but really dialing in on, like, I think Gremloe hit the nail on the head, like what materially impacts their life.
Yeah, just a yes and on your statement, which is very good. There's an old proverb, I can never remember where it's from, but it was one that kind of clicked when I first heard it back in like 2011, that the greatest trees are planted by old men who know they'll never sit in its shade. And that is such a beautiful sentiment, not just because it rings true, but because there is so much motivation behind it, that it can actually radicalize you. And radicalizing and deprogramming, this is a decades-long process. No one goes from being like a, ANCAP, libertarian, Reaganomics era, like type scientist or academic or, politician, hears something and then suddenly, oh, well, I'm a Marxist-Leninist now. It's a process that takes like a lot of reinforcement. And I think being consistent in our messaging and being consistent in how vigorously we try and move people from the positions that don't do us any good to our position, which objectively I think is better, is what we need to like ground, I guess.
Look, objectively, I would say we're correct.
Yes,
correct.
Of course.
I guess
the data supports it.
I guess for like a political analogy, I kind of think a lot of the people in science, like the whole point of the system of science, right, is to get rid of human biases because we're all biased and that leads to problems. I think they kind of view themselves as like the Supreme Court, where they're like, oh, we're these apolitical people, right? Politics doesn't affect us. We just make objective decisions, when they're not. And so you have to get them to somehow realize that that's the case, that we're, the system itself is designed to get rid of that, but the system you built has problems because you're humans. And so you're constantly need to, try to get rid of those biases and, point out the things that are wrong with the system. I don't know how I figured it out, I guess, but just being in it, I figured out there's so many flaws, and I'm biased, obviously, as well in many ways. But I think using psychology, for example, is a really important thing. That's like wrapped up with our communication stuff too, which is just like, we just report some results to a journal, and we just expect that the public's just going to know how science works and the science because we did that. That's not how it works. That's not how you teach people. That's not how you tell them about science. So we gotta take this stuff from other fields and learn how to, mess with our systems here.
Cross-functional, I can't tell you. So my fiance is an engineer, and he happens to be a great communicator, but half the time he's like, just come read this email that another engineer sent me. And I'm like, what is this person saying? And it's because I'm sure, look, I have no doubt this person knows exactly what they're talking about. I have no doubt that they are an expert in that field.
You're correct.
But what they are not an expert in
right here
is like making it clear and concisely explaining why that's important. And that's something that like someone with a communications background, a marketing background. Even like I've hired, when I used to work in marketing, I would hire tons of
this
philosophy
is a
majors,
beautiful
English majors, because no one writes better copy.
Absolutely.
No one
Love it.
can communicate ideas more clearly and concisely, especially when they have a little bit of a STEM background as well, because they have to understand the foundational concepts if you're going to be then
Sock
communicating
kids in,
technical
hell
things.
yeah.
But I totally agree. I mean, and you guys are like STEM folks, so I'm talking into like not the target audience, but I'm like, I think we in this country, we push so much on like, no, you have to get a good STEM education. That's the key to success. And I'm like, that is a massive, that can be a massive key to success and setting you up for success in the future. But that at the expense of not getting a strong foundation in humanities is going to hamstring you. And if you don't want to go into STEM and you want to go into humanities, people that say, oh, you can't make money off that is bullshit. When I worked for the NBA, National Basketball Association, one of the VPs in the marketing department was an art history major.
Hell yeah.
Yeah. Well,
it's bullshit.
Well, there's
executives.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Just quick thing. Executives people in business who do business type stuff make way more money than scientists ever do.
Mm-hmm.
So if people's definitions of success is money, then don't go into science.
There is a misconception.
Someone tried. Oh, sorry, go for it.
Oh, I was just gonna say there is a misconception within like the American like zeitgeist that scientists and academics are solely in it for the money because they get those grants. There's a line that a lot of like particularly Republican operatives use, that scientists, they just want those grants so they can get their cushy like $100,000 a year, not understanding like, one, that's usually not the case, and two, that how that is distributed, how the division of labor within academics works, they're getting nothing. Adjunct professors are like so incredibly underpaid and so abused within their workforce.
Yep. Oh, totally. It should be criminal, because the amount of work they not only like put towards like educating the next up and coming class of professionals, but also the amount they contribute to research, to things that will generate a return for the university or notoriety for the person spearheading it, and are paid nothing. It's wild to me, but I don't know. The whole thing is really frustrating. I remember, sorry, I just totally lost my train of thought. I've been drinking. If you saw me, it's a margarita in a can.
Hey, well, I'm right here with you.
Oh.
Nice. It's actually, it's shockingly good. We saw it at our like local grocery, and we're like, we're curious, but like low bar, right? Yeah. And actually,
nice.
Yeah, you're making me want to bust out the Christmas beer from Costco that I still got lying around my fridge.
Ooh, Christmas beer. I'm not taking down my Christmas decorations until February. So
yeah, same.
If it's any consolation, I left like the two that I have up all year. So do you.
Yeah. There is there's something I want to touch on real quick. I don't know if we're about to move on to another topic or not, but on the topic of
do whatever we want.
STEM lords, okay? There is, and I talk about this, I feel like every day on my stream, there is something fundamentally broken about the mindset behind like hyper STEM lords and rugged individualists and capitalist realists, that you cannot view things within a macro lens while also, keeping the micro within the back of your mind. And within sociology, we call this the sociological imagination, the ability to see things, that how they intersect along psychological and social lines. That's obviously not an exact definition, but if you can't view things systemically, then you are only viewing things within like microcosms, and that cripples every aspect of your thought process. And I really think that communicating this ability to people and like trying to get them to understand how to analyze systems is key to not only helping out, workers, to see how they are exploited within this system, but also within our field.
It's missing the forest for the trees, right? Totally. Oh my God. I mean, I can't tell you. So growing up, I live in San Francisco. I grew in Silicon Valley. So I had parents that like worked in the tech industry, and I can't tell you how pervasive that, I call it the Bay Area mythology, of like the lone genius that like changes everything, while completely discounting that everything that was made and innovated here, like it was done as part of a team. No one works in a vacuum. Nothing was created in a vacuum. And largely there's a small number of people that like materially benefit from the creation of whatever that thing is, or the building of that company. But at the end of the day, yeah, like I think that idea that there has to be this like lone genius that somehow figures it out, I think it works completely contrary to reality, because like most scientific discoveries, like maybe back in the day with Galileo or with like Nikola Tesla, maybe they were able to do some things without like a team behind them. But nowadays, like any major scientific breakthrough, I would assume is not just a single person working, you know, burning the midnight oil and all of a sudden having this glorious breakthrough. I would imagine that it's the culmination, culmination of a lot of people's work that then just like intersects at the right moment in the right way, and then it leads to something different. And like, you're right, it's that rugged individualism archetype that Americans fucking love. We have such a hard on for that shit. It's so dumb.
I love that you use the word mythology, because, and here's where like my real lefty stuff comes out. Within this framework, within this like cultural mindset that we have, manifests, and this is from Umberto Eco's 14 Points of Fascism, a fascist mentality, that this mythologized past, this cult of personality that we have behind like figures like Elon Musk and Trump and Jeff Bezos, that these people are somehow objectively better, that somehow they've been able to achieve greatness, never mind the large masses that have helped them accumulate their wealth. They did it. But we don't think, because we lack that sociological imagination, that ability to view things systemically, that nothing they have is a product of like zero labor that was put into it. Everything that they have is because of people who put them there. And getting beyond that is very difficult for a lot of people.
And what's interesting about this, I'm going to do a yes and, like you said, I'm going to throw a hot take at you.
Okay.
I really like what you said about like the fascist mentality, right? Where we like elevate people to that kind of a prominence where they think, you know, they have become the pure distillation of whatever it is they do. I think Fauci is subject to that mentality. I honestly think we've gotten to a point where, you know, Fauci's literally running around saying, you know, an attack on me is an attack on science. Well, you are not the entirety of the institution. You're just an 80-year-old man who leads a very small fraction of it. So, you know, scientists, again, like they love that rugged individualism where you're supposed to just bootstrap your way into discovering something and winning a prize or making money off a patent. And then you become somehow this cornerstone of, you know, infectious diseases, and you're called upon by the powers that be to respond to a brand new virus that dropped 2 years ago, and now here we are for better or worse. You know, that mentality, I think, has led him down a road where he has not really done what the greater scientific community and the public has really needed him to do because of that mentality you described.
And people will take advantage of that that mentality that people have, and like Jordan Peterson, unfortunately, is a good example of this, how they themselves personify the great man that he talks about. Where would we be without men? Oh, the great man theory.
That's a great, you nailed that voice.
Oh, thank you.
But Lobster Daddy, when did you get here?
I know, he's the dragon of chaos. But like, he himself is a victim of that without realizing it. But there is a prevalence that we have towards gravitating to people of prominence, and I think in times of desperation we try to cling to personalities or people who seem to have some kind of hold over the systems that we have there that we can look to. Trump is a great example of this. Reagan as well, Bush during like the post 9/11 era. These people are just fallible people like anyone else, but because of the systems that they exist within, they can fall victim to their own kind of sauce. You know what I mean?
Lost in the
Totally.
sauce.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and like Marcus, to sort of piggyback off of what you were saying, Natty, you had mentioned how a lot of scientists kind of consider themselves almost like the Supreme Court of that, where they kind of internalize that apolitical image, or see it as, oh well, I'm obligated because that's what a scientist does, and so I have to approach it from this very neutral, like aggressively neutral perspective. And I think I would argue there's probably a lot of disciplines where that's the case, and it's because that maybe I think we're in a hyper polarized political climate right now that wasn't always the case in this country. And so I think maybe the reason, this is me speculating, by the way, I have no data to back this up, none whatsoever. I hypothesize that perhaps when we were not as further apart on the political spectrum, it was seen as gauche to say, oh, I'm political, I'm this, because in reality, they weren't that far apart. And so they were all about maintaining decorum, and there was a different power structure. Of course, now that we're way further along the political spectrum, maybe that's why people are starting to demand, like, no, this is political. You can't pretend that the decisions that are made in terms of health policy, those have an impact on economics. Those have an impact on social justice, on racial justice. This is all interconnected, but maybe it took things getting super polarized for that interconnectedness to be pronounced.
I would entirely agree with that, namely because, like, especially in light of the CDC stuff this week, it's felt like a giant Band-Aid in science just got ripped off, and we're watching like the blood flow forth from what it was covering up. I've seen so many like old, crusty, like careered out scientists who already have tenure, like they're now just getting around to be like, oh, maybe the CDC isn't like doing the right things after all, when, probably more like younger, more connected, hooked up to the flow of information type folks, scientists like me and Natty, for example, like we've been saying this shit for months. Like it feels like the old guard has just kind of gotten around to it, where it's like, okay, it's better late than never, but I guess they were, like you said, a product of their time, their training environment, where it was more of that just apolitical kind of drop out, not pay much attention to it, and then it kind of rots and becomes this insidious, festering political mess that is now starting to manifest. And when the CEO of an airliner can email the CDC and be like, yo, dog, what's up? Can you change the policy? That's pretty much like the apex of that, right? We were reaching the point where it's coming to a head.
And then what, a day later? Yeah. And then what, a day later, they changed the policy.
It was like 5 days later, and they one-upped them. They gave them more than they were asking for. Like, they were like, oh yeah, maybe you could like let people... Go ahead.
That was the same thing with our defense spending, right? Where we're just like, the Pentagon asked for something, and they're like, oh, how about $30 billion more as a treat?
Yeah.
And they're like, okay.
I'll see your $29 billion and raise you 35.
Right. And then when it comes to like, paying for healthcare or like educating the children, they're like, no, we can't find any money.
Yeah.
You could check under the couch cushions, but we don't know where the money went.
Yeah, the microcosm of that is asking university administrators to pay their grad students living wages, because it's always, oh my God, the university has fallen on such hard times. There's a pandemic. We have to pay for all the testing. Oh, it's really rough. But then the next day it's like, oh, great, time for a new $96 million athletic facility. Like that literally is happening on my campus, and people are like none the wiser to it. It's like, do you not see the giant pit that's been carved out next to the existing gym for the new gym? Where do you think they got the money? It's the money they don't want to give to you because they think you're just a peon. Like, we should maybe do something.
I say this as a former, I was a college athlete, played volleyball, was on scholarship. So I say that, and I'm short too, but I could jump. back when I was in shape and not 33. But like, that's like a different life. But even so, like, I think it's absurd to spend as much on like athletics. And I mean, I can't tell you how many times my campus went through like a new beautification thing that cost some insane amount of money. And I just couldn't help thinking to myself, like, could they maybe like tenure another professor instead, like, and pay for that? Wouldn't that like long-term benefit the university better than this? And interestingly, I was talking with my fiance's family about this very question with all these universities that spend a ton on like new athletic centers and stuff. And we think there should be, similarly to how in professional sports they have a salary cap in terms of like how much they can spend on like the salaries. We think there should be like a spending cap or a salary cap on like athletic resources for their programs, with a sliding scale, you know, if it's like D1 or D2, whatever, because it's absurd. Like, you guys as grad students deserve a living wage. If a job's worth doing, it's worth being paid a living wage. And like, it's stupid that that is a controversial statement, because like
if you really want to mauled about exactly what you're talking about, for anyone here and in chat, just Google LSU Student Rec Center Lazy River.
Oh, I've heard about this.
We have a lazy river at LSU that spells LSU. It's like an 85 million. It's a very nice gym. It's an awesome place to work out. But when my wife was going to LSU for her education degree, and there's black mold on the walls and ceiling tiles are falling out and there's no AC, but we have a brand new $85 million gym with a lazy river in it, it seems like our priorities are not quite, where they should be.
Yeah.
I interviewed college sports.
Jesus.
I had the same thing. I don't remember if it was like Purdue or Boulder. One of the two had that as well. But I was going to say, for grad students at least, I would argue that maybe we should be paid what a bachelor's degree in our field would get paid. Because, I mean, obviously we do labor for the university in the form of research, but a lot of times you actually make more money for the university as well. So like me, for example, I mean, sometimes you're a TA, you teach. I don't teach, I just do research. But it's a weird system because, like, for the privilege of me doing research, I owe them tuition, which they don't spend any resources on me, right? I'm not taking classes, I'm only doing research, I'm just doing work. So they're not giving any resources, yet I owe them tuition. And how do they get that tuition? They take it from the government. So not only am I doing work for them, they're literally saying, government, you owe me money for that person working for the university. So then they get money from the government.
Like, that's a ridiculous system.
Yeah.
That's fucking, I mean, my brother just went through this because he's finishing up his grad program at Berkeley, right across the bay from me. And like, as part of it, he was doing some research, but then also doing like some TA work. And he's like, I am paying like $50,000 a year. And I take out loans. And like, even if I get a great paying job, it's going to take a while for me to pay those back. And I'm going to be in debt for a long freaking time. So that I can like not only do my own coursework, like do my research for my thesis, dissertation, whatever, but I'm also like expected to teach another professor's class. Like, how's that okay?
Yeah, it shouldn't be. It shouldn't be.
It's a business. I mean, I don't know how long, but yeah.
It is the most easy to recognize form of labor exploitation.
Totally.
And that's why.
And the unpaid summer.
Yeah.
I've always said any company when I've hired summer interns, it's like, no, I'm not going to take unpaid. That's ridiculous. That's like rich kids, like rich families' kids that they're just like, do something.
Trust fund Andes.
Yeah, exactly. No, like, I think that's highway robbery.
Yeah.
And this is how, well, I don't know how well it works, Marcus, because I've never talked to anybody about a union, but this is how maybe you can convince them that they should start a union. We do not have any grad student union here.
Yeah, I mean, that's actually, I'm trying to think.
Someone in my chat just brought up a very good point that TA grading is just outsourcing.
Oh,
Yeah.
100%. Oh,
Yeah.
dude,
Yeah.
yeah. Especially if you're teaching a class that your advisor is like responsible for running, it's basically like you do all the bitch work or you're not graduating. Like
Mm,
so much of what we do is actively held over our heads. I think someone in chat was saying earlier, you should take all of these unfair labor conditions on the chin because it's such a privilege to get a PhD. You're going to be part of the noble academia group of thinkers that are going to advance our society. So this is just what it was like. We had to do it, and so should you. It's very, again, individualistic and kind of boomery. Like it's an old generation mentality,
Yeah.
and we
Or
all get
rather than
subject
like,
to it.
hey, rather than, I think it's trying to shift the conversation to be like, well, I paid my dues. This is how it's always been. So this is how it's going to be. I think, what I want people to ask themselves is, does it have to be? And what would it mean to you if it were different?
Yeah.
What would it mean to you if you didn't have to deal with this kind of exploitation of your labor? What would it mean to you if you were actually being paid living wage for all of this work? How would that affect your life, affect your research, the fervor with which you approach your studies and everything else? Like, let's think about what that opportunity would look like, because I think people get so bogged down in, well, it's always been like this, so of course it's never going to change. And it's on us as people who care about this stuff, who are talking about it right now, but it's on us to maybe try to shift the conversation away from, well, that's just, we can't do that, that's how it's always been, to, well, but what if something was different? Like, what would make your life easier if one thing were to change? And what would that mean, not only for you, but like everyone you work with?
Mm-hmm.
How would that? And it's a hard shift in a conversation to.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll go ahead and like pose that same question, not to like change the topic, but in the spirit of change, we can sort of change the topic. But if we want to talk about how we go about addressing a myriad of the problems that the institution of science has, especially if we're talking about either de-radicalizing or pushing some of the greater scientific constituency farther to the left, what does that look like? What form of institutional organization do we advocate for? What restructuring, reformatting of thought needs to happen?
Ooh, I think
That's a very broad question.
I think it first starts with unionization. Recognizing common interests, regardless of political affiliation and ideological leanings. I think that is the first step in order to get any kind of consensus and kind of like mobilization within that group.
I think also, even like the precursor to that is just a greater class consciousness for them. I think a lot of people, again, don't interpret what is happening to them as exploitation. And I think maybe, for the longest time, that was certainly a barrier for my own, developing a political ideology and moving further to the left. But I think people need to be convinced or shown that like this isn't the only way to do things, and that they deserve better. And they not only deserve better, but like they actually collectively have the power to demand better, should they work collectively. So, because I agree, unionization is like one of the best structural forces that labor can use to ensure that they are not being exploited, that they're being paid a fair wage, that they are given the benefits that they deserve. But in order to get them to that point, sort of building up an education on class consciousness, I think, is going to be essential.
And I guess I kind of see it as like two systems too. So there's like the university system, right, where they exploit our labor, but then there's the science system, like how we do the science too, which is kind of intertwined with it. And I don't know how you take care of that one, because I don't know. Yeah, that one's kind of like the STEM lord mentality, right? Where like even grad students, it's like you have this idea that like you're gonna have some big breakthrough, and then that's gonna lead you to publish like the best paper ever, and then all these people are gonna love it, and they're gonna view you as a genius, and then you're gonna be like an assistant professor or whatever college you want to go. Yeah. And I think that's kind of a problem with like, how do you fix that system too? Like it's a separate thing. I don't know.
I mean, a lot of it maybe is even just changing the conversation. We talked about like the mythology of the Bay Area earlier, but I think a lot of that can be changed in just the narratives that people see in the media, or when you think about a massive like scientific breakthrough, recognizing and popular and like publicizing the process it took to get there, where like, hey, this wasn't made in a vacuum. This wasn't just like some lone genius, and celebrating that process. But again, like that's something that, you know, as individuals, we can maybe do our part within just like our circles to circulate those narratives, to sort of adjust the way we talk about those types of things. But unless it happens on like a larger societal scale, it's gonna be tough.
I think it is also like I mean, obviously everything is related to society. We're not isolated from science.
We live in a society.
Scientists. Yes, you do live in a society. Yeah. Oh, what? I guess I noticed like the new grad students, they're the ones who kind of have that mentality more. And then as they go through the system, then they realize there's a lot of problems and they kind of have that mentality less. Like I always try to push on all the grad students around me that I don't know what percentage I would put at it, but like more than 50% of it is luck. Like with where you end up with your like prestige in the academic world is mostly luck. And you know, a lot of them were like, no, it's just hard work and, you know, being a genius or whatever. And then they eventually realized it. So maybe it's like a public kind of view of science thing is a big part of it, you know, which would be, you know, societal kind of issues. I don't know. There's a lot of stuff. And you know, Gremloe, you're the sociologist.
Well, what I'm kind of thinking of whenever, you know, you're describing this is it doesn't seem like we within the public who exist outside of like the scientific like sphere don't really have a firm grasp of what that looks like. Yeah, and I feel like education on that is a great place to start. I don't know exactly how we would get this, you know, to the public where we have a better understanding that it's not, you know, dudes in lab coats who show up with a briefcase and then they, you know, pour chemicals into beakers and, you know, a paper appears out of nowhere and, oh, hey, look, we have a vaccine. Like, that's not obviously how it works. So when people exist outside of that, they don't, they just expect that these systems run as intended, which, as all systems, is not how that works.
So then I guess the question becomes like, if people don't have an understanding of what happens within that system, how does the system educate the people on what it does?
Yeah, because I think that's a really salient point, because it's not always like messaging to those who are in the scientific community or who are in grad school, but also, I mean, from a larger societal standpoint,
that's
when you see like the images that are reflected, reflected
what are
back
the
in
mechanisms,
media or just other forms
what are some of the mechanisms of social reproduction of that structure? Where can you intervene?
That's largely shaped by the public's perception of like, well, what is science? What, like, how does research happen? Like when you say peer review, what the heck does that mean? And just getting the general public a broader education and fluency in like the scientific community and how it operates. I think that would like work wonders.
Yeah, and to steal from a chatter, what are some of the mechanisms of social reproduction of that structure? Where can you intervene is what they're asking.
God, that's a good question.
Yeah, I know. Base chatter.
That's where a very good question.
Yeah, like, are they asking where you can intervene just in terms of like society? Like how do we implement something that can achieve that education of how science works? Like, is at what level, like, do we do this with a greater like education reform of the entire American education system, which is desperately in need of it?
Ideally so. I've been saying for a while that media literacy and critical thinking courses are necessary, as well as sociology, but that's because I'm biased in that regard.
Critical thinking,
yeah.
At the very least,
critical thinking almost feels like a meme at this point, where like, don't get me started on some of the political streamers on this platform, but critical thinking, yeah, you know who I'm talking about, Maddy. Yeah.
I
Critical
think we
thinking
all kind of
feels
have
like
an idea.
it's just absent of any kind of actual substance. It's just, oh, I can do math, I can do read a sentence, and that make critical think. And that's
Yeah, and it's like it's important, I think, and this maybe goes into the media literacy suggestion, is that like when you get a piece of information, when you're like reading a paper or an article, consider that source, consider the lens through which that source is viewing and then portraying that information. What are the implications then? Like getting people to maybe not be so face value. And I realize that it's a tall order to try to get people to like read just beyond the headline and to actually do some like reading comprehension and analysis and think further than just like, oh, I read this thing and that must be it.
Yeah.
And I think I think generationally we're the younger folks. Oh my God, I said younger folks. I'm a fucking grandmother. I would say like Gen Z and millennials are much better at this, but I mean, there's a reason that there's the meme of like boomers on Facebook cultivating an entire political ideology based on like the stupid memes that like their friends share and that they see on their news feed. And I would say that like that disparity in terms of what people take as fact on like social media versus not, I would say that like just because we grew up with technology much more than like their generation did, perhaps we have greater just like media literacy, and formalizing that would behoove society. It would behoove it.
Yeah, the proliferation of social media is certainly an aspect to it. I mean, all generations inevitably are more progressive than their predecessors. This is just a natural progress of time. I mean, there are certainly influences that can regress society's outlook on certain like aspects of it. But I think, oh damn, I almost lost my thought there. Where they take on those attitudes is like where we need to jump in. A lot of people think that like propaganda means how to brainwash or how to influence the thoughts of a given population. Propaganda is just information, how you put out that information and like through what lens you're putting it into the public. And I think as academics, as people who exist online and who are media figures, no matter like how small of a following you have, it is the responsibility of you, if you are acting within good faith, to motivate people to seek out information that is not only accurate but does justice towards whatever like framework you're looking into. If you're looking at like scientific research, you need to be looking out for like people outside of like the Brett Weinsteins of the world. You need to be looking for people who are motivated through like good faith to make sure that whatever information they're putting out is supposed to be positively effective. If that makes any sense at all. I feel like I lost my words.
Totally.
No, that
makes
makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
I always
go ahead, Natty.
Sorry, Marcus.
No, all you.
Oh, okay. It always makes me mad when people are like, "Oh, you just gotta put like some fact checking on Facebook and that'll fix the problem." Like, I realized, I think it's the case, that critical thinking is sort of the core problem. Like, doing the fact-checking thing, you're like treating a symptom. You're not treating the disease. The disease is the inability to critically think. So you can do all that crap you want, but it's not going to solve the problem. So education, there we go. That's the key.
I think it's not simply critical thinking. You're on the right track. I think it's that how misinformation manifests, especially online, is so hard to pinpoint. There was a study done recently how effectively Facebook, big enemy, has been able to curb misinformation within the English-speaking world as opposed to the non-English-speaking world, where that curbing of misinformation is almost non-existent. So people who are talking to their abuelas in like, Honduras, they're getting unfiltered misinformation on vaccines, on COVID, on everything. Meanwhile, people who are like, immigrant families that are existing within the English-speaking world, they're not getting that. So we need to take a bigger look at how information like procreates within this space.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean. I guess I didn't mean.
No, you're good.
No, you're totally fine. I mean, that's a good subject. I remember going over some content on stream once about, I think it was Bolivia, like a country that was subjected to said nonstop ass blasting of misinformation, and it resulted in all of them foregoing vaccines in favor of drinking industrial bleach, to the point of like hospitals starting to fill up with people with complications from drinking actual bleach.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's a problem that manifests itself very readily. I think the Biden admin caught a lot of flack for not like appointing some sort of czar of disinformation to really take on a lot of the bullshit that their colleagues across the aisle in the Republican Party are constantly saying 24/7, right? When you get Fox News correspondents telling everybody that vaccines are bad and you should go shoot Fauci in Minecraft because science bad,
right?
And then what do you hear from the Democratic establishment that's currently in power? Like,
we believe in the science.
Yeah, follow the science.
Yeah,
and then they weaponize that to make ridiculous changes at the request of Delta Airlines, but. I think at that point, do the powers that be actually have an interest in doing things like online censorship, deplatforming of harmful individuals? Like, that comes back to a conversation that comes up all the time in the political sphere, right? Like, should we even platform some of these people? How many people should Twitch ban? Natty and I know of a streamer in this category who's a known conspiracy theorist who pulls in, 200 plus viewers from Twitter, who's anti-mask, anti-vaccine. Yeah, I mean, they're bots. He bot farms viewers to spread misinformation. So, do we think that censorship and deplatforming of bad faith actors, like, is this a valuable tool for us when we go about trying to sort of curate the information that people have access to?
Jail.
Yeah.
Jail.
I mean, I think we've seen evidence that deplatforming works. And I think especially when those people are they're directly causing harm by spreading that kind of like misinformation. They are directly putting people's lives in danger.
Being pay-gated to only students and staff keeps people from both getting interested in disciplines, but just letting people
not
just
what
take a
they're
second
doing.
hands report.
This is also why, by the way,
public access to like vast sources of information is critically
I recognize
important.
the limits of my expertise, and like I am honest about that. Like when I was on a panel, what was that? Like a few months ago, where we were talking about the vaccine, or like the potential that it may have been from what's it called? Oh, like the Wuhan lab. You know what I did after the stream? And like, I'll give props to Read and Rap, my one of my mods. He was like, hey, you should like have Marcus have Homozygoat on your stream, because like he's a microbiologist. Because there was so much misinformation like just spreading on that panel. And that was the panel, by the way, for those watching. I had nothing to say because I was like, this is fucking ridiculous. And so I made myself live on stream a tinfoil hat. So it was just like, I was like, this is absurd. I'm going to give it the level of seriousness all of this bullshit deserves. And then afterwards, what did we spend, Marcus? We were on for like an hour or whatever, where I was just like, hey, where I was like, chat, any questions about COVID, like shoot them. I had him on stream because I recognize that like I am not equipped to answer these questions or like give them the attention they deserve. So the most responsible thing I can do is bring someone on and platform them to give like their like to lend their expertise to the conversation, so that the information people are getting is not only correct, but it's coming from a source with some form of authority on the subject matter, or at least, a deeper knowledge of the subject matter beyond like me reading headlines and like skimming through articles. So I think we as streamers maybe could do a better job of like ensuring that when we're talking about especially subjects that involve science, to do our best to platform folks who have a certain degree of credibility and expertise, so that any information we're putting out there, we can feel good about and feel like we're being responsible in our due diligence.
Yeah.
At that point, I might just clip everything you said and send it to Hassan, because Jesus Christ, he will not stop platforming Feigl Ding. I am
Dude, he was talking about it today, and I thought of you.
Oh my God.
I've missed those moments.
I still think
Or
he
when
had
people,
no
like-
creative control in who the guest was, and just like, okay, well, we got a scientist coming on. Okay.
I just,
I think
if I
that's
were,
actually
if
kind
I
of-
were a big
go ahead,
streamer,
go ahead.
I would. Sorry, last, I'm like, that would drive me crazy. Even if I was like, yeah, if I was a big streamer pulling in some, it's like, sure, that'd be great. But I don't know, I'd shit my pants if I like didn't know who was coming on or what the background was, because I guess I take who I platform really seriously, and maybe people should. I think people kind of get flippant with it because they're in pursuit of clout and clicks and views and whatever, and it's like, that ain't worth it if you're spreading misinformation, especially when it's fucking dangerous during a national pandemic.
Yeah,
I'm
this
sorry,
was the conversation that
international.
Marcus and I had when we first spoke to each other on like the responsibility of platforming honest actors.
Yes.
Yeah. But the fact that it keeps coming up, I think it speaks to how ingrained of a problem it is, not only just in like the streamer universe, but even in general, right? If we're talking about the people that are making the media rounds right now to defend the CDC policy, again, I go back to it because it's such like a great example of all the shit that's happening. You have our CDC director who's just like talking around it. You have Fauci who's just talking around it. Like, the people who are there to try and actually communicate science are not communicating science. They keep saying, well, we're just following the science, but everyone in science is like, where can you show me your science? They don't say anything.
Yeah.
So that speaks to
so.
the computer modeling that is not based in real life. That was one of the small handful of data points they actually claim supported doing this, which is all bullshit.
Oh my
But separate
God.
conversation. So again, it speaks to sort of this like necessity for scientists to be part of the society. Joker makeup on, because we live in a society. Scientists, again, they have this predilection to locking themselves in the ivory tower. They're toiling away in their deep dark laboratories, working on experiments that they think are going to get them the money and prestige they deserve. But in reality, everything outside of the tower is burning and is full of microbes and infectious diseases. And the moment they step out, they wonder, what the fuck? Like, how did this happen?
Mm-hmm.
So I guess all of this to say, like, the question I'll pose to everybody, how do we sort of encourage and promote the notion of just being more like culturally aware and less of like a STEM lord debate bro? Like, how can we sort of expand the thought of people who are normally captured into that demographic of, I'm just here to find facts so I can own someone in the free marketplace of ideas. Like, society is more than that. So how do we communicate that?
Well, I think it harkens back to how everyone is looking after their own material interests, and you might be able to elaborate on this or shine some light on it, but there seems to be a fear, a complacency, a kind of like hesitancy to engage in any kind of, I don't want to use the word activism, but proactive responses to these kinds of issues within academia. Like, there seems to be a fear that I might lose my grants, I might lose my position, my tenure, and those kinds of protections that would stop people from doing that, I think are in order. That that's something that we need to have in place. But being unapologetic in your view as a scientist, as an academic, that these systems that we have in place, they're not working, this information that's coming out, it is not correct, and being kind of gate-kept behind whatever institutions are in place, I mean, that's obviously an obstacle that has to be overcome. Is that right?
Yeah.
I mean, I would also say, one of my favorite stories, even though I hate that lone genius myth, what I would point out when people say, oh, well, I just need to do STEM so I can sell things in marketplace of idea, and that's where the one of my favorite stories about Steve Jobs is that he credits a calligraphy class he took in college as a major influence in the original design of the Mac. And to think that you can do really great things in isolation with like just, science and math and whatever, like that's such a narrow view, and that the greats, the people who have these incredible breakthroughs or that influence society, They don't do it where it's just one thing or another. It's the confluence of all of their interests, their perspective, that makes what they then create so transformational. And that's why there's value in things like humanities. So I almost want to destigmify the humanities in general, or show that, as someone who works in STEM or who is studying in a STEM field, that doesn't mean you have to like completely avoid the humanities. In fact, it makes you better at your job when you have a varied background that you can pull from, that you can draw influence from, inspiration. I mean, like that, I think I'd love to see more people stressing that. That is one thing, like with my fiance, he's an engineer, but he has so many other interests that are like not related at all to computers, not related at all to like just coding. And that's what like makes him good at his job, and also just an interesting person, because let's be honest, a lot of your success is going to depend on networking. So be an interesting person, let your intellectual curiosity extend beyond your discipline, because you're going to benefit from it. And just like, I don't know, I feel like a lot of those kids also, like, they're all what, like 21, 22, they have like everything
depending,
figured out.
like,
Yeah, so did I.
22 through
So
25,
did I.
26-ish, yeah.
Yeah, I was a big fucking dummy then, and so were you, and it's okay.
Oh yeah, we all were.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I don't know what this
I mean-
were thing is. I'm still there.
No, like for me right now is like, how dare you? 4-year-old me, in like 7 years is like,
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, so I mean, I think the consensus is that we need to make the people who are going to comprise the institution of science across all disciplines more well-rounded. Natty, I think you could maybe speak to this, like, at least maybe, let's say your program, let's engage in at least 2 anecdotes here. My program has really nothing like that in terms of like the classes we have to take, or, the seminars we have to attend. It's all just, constant research, constant what I am studying 100% all the time. Is there anything like that would even come close for the training that you went through, Natty?
I would say undergrad, right? Everybody probably knows that the idea is that all degrees nowadays are supposed to be a liberal, right, degree, so they make you take humanities and such. A lot of science people probably are like, oh, I don't want to take those classes, whatever. So it might not help their mindset, but at least they get some exposure to it. But at least on the grad level, yeah, nothing. Even within our field, I think a lot of the grad stuff is kind of crappy. Like, I just came to grad school, and I literally, most of my classes were just undergrad again, except maybe a little more detail sometimes, instead of actually doing, like, how do you, like, logic through your experiments? How do you communicate to people, like, your ideas and your thoughts and stuff? None of that I took classes on, and that would help me with my career directly, in an easily viewed way. But then there's the other stuff, like the liberal arts, more stuff that would also be helpful. None of that came. So I don't know. I have to put more thought into it about what the solution is. I mean, they have much better ideas than I'm sure I could come up with about that.
There's a
Yeah, I mean, go ahead, Grandma.
there's a method within computer programming called a rubber duck program, where you sit an actual rubber duck in front of your computer, and you explain your code to the rubber duck so that you're going to catch yourself when things don't make sense. I feel there's something about that strategy of being able to explain your own processes and your own methods in a very dumb way that you can understand yourself and your own methods better, that I feel like the STEM lords need to start practicing.
That's I love that. Like, they say the best way to show that you have mastered a subject is if you can explain it to a 5-year-old.
Mm-hmm.
Because that way you have such a mastery of it that you're able to distill it down, because you recognize the like core themes that make it important and can explain it in layman terms. And that's really hard.
Yeah.
That's hard to do. I think also another suggestion that came from my chat was to sort of like maybe, and I don't know if happens in terms of building curriculum, but really internalizing like the philosophy of your discipline and the impact on humanity that it delivers. So rather than having it dwell more in the abstract where you're dealing with data sets, you're dealing with things in a laboratory, but seeing, well, what is the impact on society that your type of research makes? How does this affect real lives day to day? And then what's like the opportunity cost if, say, this kind of research wasn't happening or didn't happen? Like, how would people's lives be different? Because I think maybe it's easy for people in STEM or STEM lords, whatever, to sort of disengage and disassociate because maybe they aren't as like confronted with the real life impacts and real life application of what they're doing. But when you put that kind of face to the work they're doing, it becomes a lot more real and tangible.
Yeah.
I think,
Empathy.
yeah, that's a really good point too. Actually, I think beyond making it better, I think it would be good for our mental health too, because I need to get better at this, but have this idea that what I do has zero, it doesn't matter at all. Zero bearing society. No one's going to care. It doesn't matter. I don't know how much I believe that, but I feel like I believe it a lot.
No. There's definitely something to that. I was talking to Professor Q about this the other day because he brought up diseases of despair. I don't think that this experience we have within our contemporary society of diseases of despair, depression, anxiety, I don't think that these things are explained that simply as diseases of despair. I think there is a disease not only of despair, but a disease of pessimism that, confronted with all obstacles that are in your way, especially if you're coming from like a low socioeconomic background, pessimism starts to set in. You start to believe that this system is in place and it is an immovable object. It is there almost as a divine entity. The system cannot be changed from within or without. And that pessimistic attitude starts to manifest itself not only in mental health issues, but in inaction to try and, change that system, no matter how small or large it is.
Totally.
Yeah,
that's
folds into
cynicism.
learned helplessness. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, yeah, just highlighting what you were saying, highlighting that in a class even, is the easiest way to do it probably. Would be really helpful, because I feel like so many people in my, science world just have the feeling of it doesn't matter what I do.
Yeah, rubber duck epidemiology, rubber duck COVID.
I love that. I feel like I need that for like when I'm for like client presentations, when I'm trying to explain, like when I've put together like a messaging tiered system. I need to like explain it to a rubber ducky first, and then when I actually pitch it, it's going to be so much easier. I love that concept.
Yeah, there's a brief Easter egg in the new Matrix movie, brief aside, where Neo, confronted with his existential crisis, is sitting in a bathtub with a rubber duck like on his head, and that's like a small nod to that programmer practice.
Interesting.
Or he's thinking about the program he's existing within and think like he's got the rubber duck on him.
I'm gonna have to ask my fiance if he's heard of that. I bet he has.
Yeah,
he's like written programs, but I love that. That's great.
And that's a way to get the STEM lords.
Yeah,
Marcus and others is Feynman is famously known for saying you have to be able to explain it to a 5-year-old or else you don't understand it. So that's our way in. That's our way in.
So not only explain it, but then explain like what's the impact. What is the human impact? Like, how does this affect people's lives? In marketing, what we do a lot of times is like, if we're trying to target a certain audience, we build out a profile of like, okay, here's our like ideal or target customer. What does that customer look like? Thinking in terms of like, and I get it, like it's easy to think that your research in a vacuum doesn't matter, but it's like with the concepts you're working towards, with the things that you're contributing to, even if it's in a seemingly small capacity, like what's that going to mean to someone? Like, is that if you're working on infectious diseases, yeah, maybe you one that the like big discovery, but your research is moving the needle a little bit, even if it's a little bit. And then what does that mean to a family who like no longer has to worry when one of their kids gets an infection or gets some sort of illness that like they can't recognize and don't know how to deal with it? Like it could make such a massive difference. Or even like, hey, I helped contribute to, you know what, even if it's just cosmetic, like I helped contribute to a better moisturizer. And now old ladies feel good about themselves because like they can use this, and their self-esteem goes up, and people don't have to fear getting old anymore because like I helped develop this thing. Like I think we're humans. We like stories that connects us to each other. So it's like, let's find what the story is there, and tell it so that it resonates. And then not only does it resonate, but they feel like they are a central protagonist in that story.
Yeah, I mean, to an extent, you're kind of exploiting that like main character syndrome where, everybody's the main character of their own life. Yeah, totally. Like, everybody else is just a supporting actor and everybody's there to help you. But like, I really like how you phrase that because it reminds me of two things. One was actually a recent news story about, I think it was DoorDash, where they instituted a policy where they had to force every single one of their engineers to deliver food at least once a month.
Which I love.
I am in 100% support of that policy, but the sheer knee-jerk reaction from all of those engineers, I think, is a symptom of where we're at, right? They're all like, oh my God, what the fuck? I didn't sign up for this. I make $400,000 a year. This is beneath me.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like,
yeah.
The same thing happens to scientists.
My fiance, who's like a software engineer, major thing. If he had to do that, you know what? He'd be fine with it because it'd be like, if this means that I'm going to like identify better with like other members that are like part of our business, so be it. But you're right. So many don't see it that way, or they're like, this is below me. No, I'm elevated. I don't need to do this. And it's like, oh, so do you think that like when you're writing code and you're developing a platform through which like a lot of these people are just trying to make a living, you really understand what their needs are? Like, do you really identify with the barriers that they face and the things that they deal with day in, day out that could like determine whether or not they make rent? You really think like you can just like, of course it's intuitive, please.
Yeah. And I know sort of in that like vein of really having to expose yourself to the impact of what you do, or truly exploring that maybe even for the first time for a lot of scientists. One graduate student in my program who graduated, I think, like during my first year, what she does now as a career is she is a chief scientific officer for a very small like foundation that's dedicated towards helping out families whose children are born with like a rare genetic illness. And what she basically does is she sits down with the families. Like that's her job, is to basically sit down and talk with all of the parents who have these kids stricken by rare genetic illness and this like family of illnesses, and to be like, okay, like here's what's going on. Here's how we can maybe understand what's going on. Like talking to them about all of their concerns, making a material impact in addition to the research she's already done in that field on genetic illnesses in this family of illnesses. So it was this really nice like union of that concept where on the one hand she can contribute to the bench work, the STEM Lord-esque aspect of all of it, and do the hard science, but then as probably more of her day she sits there and talks to real life, real world people who are affected by the very thing she's researching. So that almost makes me want to advocate for a system where scientists are forced out of the ivory tower to mingle with everybody else.
Well,
oh no, go outside. People,
touch grass. Oh
no.
Shit.
There's actually within the medical field, this is a practice. Like while nurses and RNs and doctors are going through their study, where they do clinicals, they spend 2 to 3 weeks in a mental health hospital, in ICU, and an ER. And they get to see like on the ground, like what does this look like whenever we're not just like looking at books and regurgitating information. That is probably the best way that you can get a feel for not only is this something you want to do when you're here, but what does it look like in practice? What does it look like in practice to be a epidemiologist and for you to be wrong, for you to get things right? What does it look like when we are a marketing or an econ major, for us to make the wrong calculations? What does that look like? What does poverty and its effects have on any given area?
Totally. It's that concept of what is it? Undercover boss or whatever.
Oh God.
People just but we just need it even on a smaller scale, where it's like, hey, maybe, especially when you are further up the supply chain or something else, supply chain as it were, maybe you need to take a swim downstream once in a while to see the like endpoint, the consumer endpoint of the work that you do, because that puts things in perspective. It's easy to get kind of siloed into whatever your specific function in that life cycle is and compartmentalize based on that. But it's good to dwell outside of it, because ultimately your labor is building towards something.
Yeah.
And that also, by the way, will put you in a primed position to then demand better treatment when you see the position you are playing in the much larger system. So going back to what we were talking about before, where it's like, how do we convince people they deserve better? They need to organize class consciousness. I think illuminating their contribution on a larger scale is paramount to that, and will serve to them then questioning, like, well, if this is what I'm contributing to, why am I in poverty? Like, why am I struggling to cover costs when like the difference I make in people's lives could be the difference between, life and death, a good life versus not, treatment for an autoimmune disease versus, it puts things in context.
Or you get to a higher position and you launch yourself into a dick rocket in outer space and talk about the beauty of the planet.
Yeah, you edge space a few times.
Ooh.
Oh my God.
Very provocative. But you are, like, all jokes aside, I do 1000% agree with you. And I think part of this needs to be at an earlier age, understanding how these mechanisms work. Just as an anecdote, my wife's younger cousin, she's like 11, 12. She saw my like commie theory on my shelf and asked me like to explain what communism is, and it was so difficult, and the only thing I could really like to make it tangible was, where did your Switch come from? Where did your Pokemon like Switch come from? And she was like, well, the store. Okay, well, there are people at the store, right, that sell it to you. Okay, so they have to get paid, but that thing has materials that came from workers all over the place. So you just holding this thing, you are connected to thousands of people throughout the world. And like that little like sense of like connection like clicked with her, that through division of labor, you were able to hold on to this crazy thing that brings you endless joy. And I think kind of understanding that like dialectic is like something we should probably try and, educate earlier on.
And
I love that way to describe communism, by the way, to like a 11-year-old. I think that's like the perfect approach.
Yeah, and then I viciously told her, never talk to anyone about this, that I told you this.
That's right. I was going to ask, I'm like, what was your, like, what, if you guys were alone, that's one thing, but I'm like, oh, were her parents there? And did you like get the...
No, she wanted me to
like,
teach her how to cook. So like while we were cooking spaghetti, she was like, by the way, what's that? And I was like, do you really want to go down this rabbit hole?
Dude, that sounds like a great night for me. Communism and spaghetti.
Yeah.
What else could I want?
Yeah, exactly.
Dream.
Yeah. Meatballs and Marks.
well, I was gonna say,
Spice and meatball.
Yeah.
And a Marks.
Yeah. We're doing phrasephobia like way too much. I feel like we're gonna get canceled.
oh God.
Look, I'm half Italian. I'm here. You have an Italian. You can say it. I've given you the Fredo pass.
Yeah, okay, cool. We got the carbonara pass, the C word.
The carbonara.
Oh my God.
Well, yes, we can't upset the most oppressed class in American society.
Oh, God.
True.
Those poor, sweet Italians.
Cuomo showed us that they're really after the Italians.
I'm not perverted, I'm just Italian.
Hey, I just kiss in the face.
My favorite meme to come out of that whole thing was like the Arthur like clenched fist meme, but it was just Mario's fist. Like that's my favorite part.
Oh my God, I haven't seen that. That's funny.
That's the thing.
But-
yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, and it's okay. If we need to blame anyone too, I'm French, and like we're being blamed. We're just like a silly bunch, so it's fine. They don't care about us. They're like, all right, you ridiculous people.
But I think fundamentally, like what the point that we're trying to reach here is, how do we get people to be more comfortable with these broader understandings of like societal impact, these systems that in some circles are taboo to talk about. These are like lefty ideas. I mean, even my sociology professor didn't want to talk about like the ills of capitalism. And this is a sociology professor. You would think this is someone who's like well versed, and she's a big Angela Davis fan, loves Fred Hampton, a gender studies professor as well. Doesn't want to talk about the ills of capitalism, just leaves it to it's because of money. So there is a stigma attached to leftist thought. There's a stigma attached to things that might tread waters within like socialist theory, that if students and people who are, maybe not graduates, but or professors can break through that mold and say, no, these things need to be talked about. We're leaving out an entire other worldview that is critical to understanding, these systems. You can't look at econ as an example, and I'll use a Richard Wolff example that he used. If you're looking at your neighbor's house and you ask one of the siblings how the house is, what the household is like, and they say, oh, it's great, and you don't ask the other sibling what it's like, and they may think it's a batshit crazy family, then you're leaving out an entire perspective, an entire critique of these systems that could be fundamentally changing like these inequalities, these woes that we experience. And I think it's up to, us within academia and in media and, even those who aren't like students, just to say, no, these things need to be talked about. There are certain things that, obviously when we're talking about like fascism, we don't want to, tread those waters, but we need to talk about these things, and gatekeeping that behind editors and saying that, oh, because my editor didn't want me to publish this within this journal, I can't ever let this see the light of day. Like, no, like these things need to be talked about.
Yeah, one sort of piggybacking off of that, it's so taboo. Like, leftist thought is so stigmatized in a lot of just science and medicine. I would say both, right? Especially if you want to talk about, say, like a medical student, as they go through their education, they start going into their residency, internship, right? They've got $1 gazillion of student loan debt they're trying to catch up on, like, or for PhDs, doctoral students, they're working arduously for years and years and years, and they get to the point where they're like about ready to graduate. Like, they feel like almost they have something to lose, or they're going to get some sort of retribution exacted upon them for having these thoughts, having these opinions, to actually, arrive at that class consciousness standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
So that might be like not necessarily something we have to answer. We could talk about this, say, at the next meeting of our ministry here, but how we go about empowering people within these spaces to be as unabashed about it as we are, right? Because not everybody's like us. Not everybody is willing to, dial up their webcam, go on to Twitch and start, fighting with people online of all stars and stripes. But, at some point, those fights kind of need to happen, right? We have to have those intimate conversations with colleagues, with people around us. We need to, as we were talking about earlier, center the impacts of what we do in, how we go about doing what it is we do. We need to realize who we're impacting, be exposed to them, learn how they benefit or are harmed by what we do, right? There's a lot of stuff that needs to happen, but like you said, the first step is to talk about it. We have to inject all of this leftist thought. So that might be something to think about, as to how we make people in science and medicine feel comfortable, if they are already at the point that we're at, talking about it.
I feel like
Totally.
Also, as much as there's a lot of problems with academia is probably an easier place, at least for now, to do it than, other places in society. Like, if I was going to stay in academia, I would totally talk politics all the time on my stream. But because I'm going to go into industry, that's where I'm worried that, like, bosses are going to see it and be like, oh, that's a leftist. What the heck? They're going to try to make a union in my workplace or some crap.
No, that's a totally valid reason. No, like that, because again, like we live in a capitalist society, and we don't want our whatever we're doing, because like if it's perceived by our boss or the managerial overlords or whatever you want to call it, if it's perceived as a potential threat to their profitability, to their business sort of operating as it has been, it's scary. And the only reason like I'm able to do it, to your point, is like I started my own business, or like me and my business partner, like I'm able to work independently of that. But if I were still working for like, big tech company, I might think twice, because, any worker, even if you're a specialized worker, the reality is that like these companies see you as expendable. And we have to think of some ways to make it so that people are more comfortable and are able to have these discussions without fearing that they're going to lose their job and like their rent and pay their rent, their mortgage, whatever.
Yeah. And also, not to say that I have ideas, but in a public manner, I guess. It's the streaming being a public manner more so for me, but I have other ways of doing things.
It's the broadcasting of it. Sure.
Yeah. Public and private opinions.
Exactly. The old Hillary Clinton take, in public and in private, two different approaches entirely. Now, Natty, I'm used to being like the loudmouth sack of shit half the time in academia. So if you just literally want to use me as a vessel for your ideas, I'm totally down for that. Let's go. Just DM me what you're thinking, man.
Yeah. I mean, I was thinking when I get a job, I might change my mind. I don't know. And I've always said to myself, I don't let people censor me. I'll say what I want. But I guess I have, in a way. So,
I mean, even if you're like looking to get into streaming, you don't have to save the VODs. You can set it up to where the VODs automatically delete when you're done broadcasting.
True.
That way they can't pull it up. I mean, they can live clip you, but not that big of a deal.
Also, you can control, at least within Twitch, who is able to clip you and not.
Oh, you can.
There's, of course, always ways. I thought there was.
Yeah.
Where it could be like follower only or
sub only, mod only.
Sub only, yeah.
I know you can disable clipping entirely, because Natty, the science streamer that we've bitched about before, that's what he did to his channel, so nobody can like tell everyone else that he's a giant conspiracy theorist. He disabled clipping entirely.
I mean, they can still do, like, if they're on their computer, they can do a screen recording, but they're gonna have to like really like bank on you. But otherwise, who knows? Like it's a bummer that that's something you even have to consider, to like, in fear that it will somehow like railroad your career. But I think there are ways that people, and you especially, can still like push these ideas, can continue the conversation, but like do so while maybe being mindful of like having it so that you're not like, he's a revolutionary. Seize him.
I mean, and there's also like, you don't even have to really worry about that until you're a big shot like Maddy.
Sure. Real big shot.
Yeah.
Do you realize until like 2019, I think I had 300 followers on, like, because I've had a Twitter since 2009. For 10 years, I had 300 followers and was like totally fine with it. I like still tweeted my bullshit, and then all of a sudden, like, someone noticed. It was like, oh,
yeah, it's that lightning in a bottle moment.
That was it. Otherwise, I spent 10 years just like, I thought. Look, I was tweeting bangers. I was giving commentary. I was giving not hot takes. I was giving correct takes. And then people noticed, and it was great.
Yeah.
And now I'm just a big shot, high flying, jet setting celebrity.
One of those blue-haired SJWs trying to make people be communists.
I know. Someone made a joke about that in my chat earlier. They're just like, oh, with a blue, like, I see you added blue hair to your pronouns. I'm like, okay.
Oh my god.
Oh no, hang on. There was a Christmas meme I saw. I think somebody put it on Hassan stream. It was we leave out a plate of milk and pronouns for Joe Biden to cancel his way down the chimney for Christmas.
Oh god, I could do a whole like movie, like 3-hour stream on like the cultural signifiers of the conservative movement. I think we spent like an hour today. I was watching a Tabernacle video, and we like segued into an hour-long thing of like what conservative drip looks like.
Yes.
Interesting. That's probably fascinating.
It's not that interesting, but just the tangents.
I mean, like, You can do what an academic does. Dress it up. Use flowery language.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes, you'll
Channel
see
your
that
sociology chops.
Ooh, synthesize that.
Yeah, so you'll see that the cultural artifacts of the American antebellum South are still present within contemporary American society.
That's the first sentence of your abstract right there.
Some editor somewhere is going to like hear that one clip and be like, yes, published.
Yeah.
And
there you go. See, this is the Twitch to publication pipeline. We'll be the founders.
Hell yeah.
I know how it works.
All right. So I think with that being said, we've been at it for a while, and this has been a fucking awesome conversation.
Yeah,
I would
what a
say
banger.
nothing short of that.
This is like my favorite conversation that I've had on Twitch, by the way, for like a long time. Because it's people that like aren't just trying to like dunk on each other, and we were having a productive conversation, and people were knowledgeable. So just like, thank you. This was so refreshing and lovely.
Maybe
the feeling's mutual, at least for me.
Maybe debate panels could be a subject later on down the line, because like like the efficacy of it, like is it just blood sport? Is it entertainment? What's the like opportunity value of that? Maybe that's something we could talk about eventually.
I like that idea. I really like that idea. I think it might be appropriate to like have a questions from chat segment, because I know we've been kind of like interspersing them all throughout, but we could actually have like, since we've got 3 streams up and running right now, we could sort of crowdsource the folks in chat to, I don't know, and maybe answer some of the things that have been on their mind as we've been having our conversation.
Yeah, maybe we can get Read and Rap. We can unpaid intern him into doing that.
Well, he's already unpaid interned me into addressing one question from my chat, because I think I missed it as it was scrolling. I think it was Circuitous asks, I've heard the panel advocate for both open scientific debate and also for the silencing and dissenting of academics or scientists. How do you strike the balance without censoring scientists who are just wrong and not necessarily malicious?
I can answer
that.
I
think there might be some context to this too, because like, for example, a big COVID disinformation spreader by the name of Robert Malone actually just got suspended from Twitter yesterday, and that's kind of at the forefront, I think, of a lot of that. And he was allegedly, the co-inventor of a vaccine that he was advocating against, which is, I think, psychotic, but that's a separate conversation. Gremloe, what were you thinking?
It's okay to be a hypocrite. You can say that I want open and like robust discussion, and I want like, the debates to be had, while also saying, no, you can't be a part of this. It's okay to be hypocritical in that.
Yeah, I agree. And also it's funny that you mentioned that guy Malone was banned, because there was someone in my chat earlier. Well, why do we silence dissenters? Malone, he was saying, and it's like, he was not coming in good faith.
Yeah.
I do have a question that was from, I'm not going to say it's Read and Rap, but it's Read and Rap. And this is specifically for Marcus.
Oh, Jesus.
Yeah. So no, he is asked.
It's going to be about MILFs.
No, it's fine. It's fine. It's like, so he said, can you ask Marcus what the best eco-friendly skin cream for old ladies is, as a callback to.
Well, we could say, there's one that comes to mind, and unfortunately, it was actually censored by Big LSF. It was Valkyrie's Reflect Skin Cream.
Okay, I'm
blue
glad
light
it was
protection
that.
Pseudoscience.
My mind went in a different direction.
Well,
I mean, look, old ladies have a lifetime of blue light accumulation. They need to protect themselves somehow.
Yeah. Okay, well, if we're gonna do
that was the question for me.
All right, if we're gonna do chats, we'll I guess we can end on this one. I had one from K-Prass. Where is it? Blah 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 blah. All right. Access to journals, libraries, etc., being pay gated or gated only to students and staff keeps people from both sides getting interested in disciplines, but just letting people not take a second-hand reports for it. That's worded very strange. I think they're trying to say like we need to have like better access to like academic journals and materials, I guess.
Totally. Oh my God. I mean, listen, for when it comes to like journalistic things where you're paying for their labor, like I think I understand why there is a paywall, but when it comes to libraries or like academic archives, it serves as just another barrier to entry for folks who don't have the means to access that wealth of knowledge and reference it. And if we are looking to create true equity within just like higher learning and other things in general, yeah, we need to think about eliminating those barriers that are preventing people from accessing those resources.
Hell
At
yeah.
least for the science specific stuff, I had two things. One, I haven't thought through this a lot, but communism science, here we go. I have thought maybe the best thing to do is you have one journal. Only one journal exists. All science is published in that journal. I don't know if it's the best idea. Haven't thought it through.
Ooh, centralized
like-
planning of journals.
I feel like it might solve a lot of problems, but anyways, that journal could be then free to the public because it's done through the government, not for profit, presumably. So that's one problem. But then I think the other problem, like more seriously, which I guess the other one maybe is a good idea, I don't know. But the other problem also I think is on the media side of it, right? Which is, well, there's both scientists, we suck at communicating, but the media also has to cover things. So, nowadays, there's media, press releases of studies sometimes, and they're not always the best. And I think just a part of it is just they don't really, care so much about just, presenting accurate science because it doesn't get the clicks. You got to have the cool headlines and all the other stuff. So there's the media side of it as well to the science side.
And there's also you have to consider like the celebritization of scientific like personalities, like Fauci. He's like definitely one of them. Sanjay Gupta of CNN, definitely another one.
Yes.
Having like a given like a council of science, where like representatives from this organization cycle through, and we don't just have like, okay, well, here's Dr. Anthony Fauci again. Instead, we have like, here's another representative of the Ministry of Science who, is here to tell us about Omicron. Maybe something like that, where instead of we have a dedicated person, we have a wealth of personality and information to kind of draw from.
Yeah, I
had another, wait. Oh, sorry, quickly. Mine's more memeing, but like I had another suggestion to add on to Natty's, where it's like, if we're going to have one journal where it's all the things that were accepted, I think we need to publish a separate journal that's all the things that were rejected, so that people can see like, okay, here is what was deemed worthy and what wasn't. So it's like we'll have the regular, primetime stuff, and then the bloopers and deep cut, the Zack Snyder deep cut.
Yeah,
I think what they were hinting at there was like publishing the quote unquote like negative data or like the failed experiments that didn't amount to anything, because other scientists and research groups will waste their time and money, of which they have little, doing possibly the same thing that's going to lead them to the same end result. So if they have that like publicly available before you even go do something, you can consult, the journal of rejected ideas or the journal of, data that didn't go anywhere, then you can be like, oh, okay, this is maybe a different rabbit hole I don't want to jump down with my laboratory. Let's go do something else.
Yeah,
that would be a big utility.
Well, and I think there's two things there. One is like negative results, so it's results like I was trying to see if this drug cures this disease. I tested it and it doesn't cure that disease. That's a negative result. That should be published in the one journal. But then I think there's other things too that were just experiments that were just bad science, right? That were rejected, not because it didn't work, but it was just because, oh, you were a bad scientist. You did a bad job. I think that should also be, in the public as well. People can learn from what not to do, I guess.
Yes, I think there's a distinction to be had versus like, okay, this was something they had in finding, but it wasn't maybe as groundbreaking or whatever that warranted publication, versus like, hey, this guy, like, his methodology is bullshit, and like he should feel bad that his methodology and everything was bullshit. They're not all created equal.
There needs to be like an additional like aspect to that. If we're going to make these things like publicly available, a lot of these things are like gate kept in academic language, that there needs to be like a spark notes for this. You know what I mean? Like we need to have somebody go through it. Additionally, there's also like barriers for this in regards to like making sure that those people are acting within good faith that translate it into common nomenclature.
Totally.
And
Well, I was sorry. One last thing, I promise.
No, go ahead, go
like
ahead.
I mentioned this, I kind of said this jokingly in my chat, but like it speaks to a larger point, and it speaks to your point of making it accessible. I was like, oh, just get them on TikTok. But truthfully, like when content creators create things that speak to science and like learning and these other concepts, that kind of stuff, even though, yeah, some of it seems kind of dumb, it's on YouTube, whatever, but it opens up that world to people and gets them interested in it. So when you're able to break something down, whether it's on Twitter or TikTok or Twitch or YouTube, like that, it exposes the work that scientists do to a much larger audience and kind of like normalizes it and gets people more familiar with how things operate.
Yeah, we need Markiplier to explain R naught values.
I mean, in a way, they kind of already tried that, because I don't know what streamers they picked on Twitch. I had like never seen either of these two people before, but they had a Fauci Twitch stream. Like, I don't know if anybody ever heard that was a thing. Like, Fauci was on this platform, eons ago, it feels like. And they were like,
the emotes were like,
well, I will tell you, the chat was, I think, in one of the streamers' chats. I think they were like hosting it there, and it was like follower only. I think it might have even been sub only. So it was heavily curated even to start with. And a lot of the questions were not even from chat. It was just like very canned, like, where can I go get a vaccine? Are vaccines good? Like, it didn't really hit that note of like a genuine conversation. So in that sense of like, yeah, Markiplier explains R naught values. Like, yeah, it would help if you had like, I don't know, Fauci and someone like Hassan, for example, who could ask, the himbo questions that, he's like, oh, what the fuck am I supposed to do? Am I supposed to get a vaccine? Am I getting a booster? Am I still wearing a mask? Like, all the questions that are genuinely on people's minds in a more sort of like open, laissez-faire setting that isn't gate kept behind, maintaining an ego or academic prestige or anything like that.
Yeah, appeal to the Zoomers.
Sure.
I think it's a twofold thing still. Like, you need media people, to be doing that sort of stuff, and scientists need to be better at it. And like, for example, I guess shameless self-plug, I'm going to try to do more YouTube, but like I've been looking into how do you tell a story? How do you communicate things to people? How do you make things interesting? Because you can't just go up there and be an academic and be like, here's my PowerPoint of what is DNA? And that's just not how people get interested and learn. So we need to do a better job. Yeah.
I love that. No, I literally do that shit if I'm like putting together a pitch or something else. I'll look up like, okay, what, like I'm trying to do a narrative on like, how do I make sure that the action or everything that all the different points that I'm doing, I'm throwing at them kind of come into a crescendo at the right point. Like, how can I tell this story in a better way? Like, even just breaking it back down to those fundamentals, it helps. Because, not everyone is a grad student who understands this stuff.
Yeah. I think one of my moderators actually said something very salient. They need to like appeal to every swath of society without coming off as like paternalistic or patronizing, right? The example she gave, which is one that I've bitched about constantly, was having to appeal to like the younger folks in like Gen Z without infantilizing them by like inviting a stream of TikTokers to the White House who are just like, vaccine good. Here's Joe Jonas singing a song, or here's Olivia Rodrigo to tell you the vaccines are good. Like, don't insult people's intelligence like that just by saying, here's a celebrity. The celebrity says you should do this. Like, actually explain to them what the hell is going on around them, and they'll be more appreciative.
Yeah, there's like a whole conversation to be had about like the liberalization of like public information and dissemination. How when it's like, when Trump was in office, it's like, oh, hey, here's Toby Keith to tell you how much America is kick-ass, and now we have Joe Biden, and here's the Jonas Brothers doing Joe Byron. Like, there is an infantilization of the American public that doesn't stick, except for maybe Republicans because they got baby brains. But I don't know. There's just something. I think it's mostly just cultural signifiers within the Republican base, but the liberalization of it certainly is like a hurdle that needs to be gotten over. Like, we need to move past that.
Yeah, that could actually be like a good discussion topic for our next meeting is, if we're talking about science communication and how information spreads, how are we ensuring that it's communicated in the right ways? Who are we talking to? Are they a bunch of baby brains who need to be told that, yes, vaccine good, SJW bad, or something like that?
Mhm.
Or can you actually, have a reasonable conversation and be like, look, you're this old, you got this many medical conditions, the virus can do this to you, you probably want to get a vaccine. Like, there are multiple levels I think we could really discuss into how to tailor information. We could even do a little bit of role play. I think Gremloe, I've been suggesting this for the anti-vax role play that I've done on my stream once before. So yeah, there you go. You got the attire already.
I'm ready whenever you are, brother.
And Maddy, your endless stream of costumery would also be perfect for it.
Of what?
Of costumery. Maddy definitely. Like, again, she hand made a tinfoil hat, like, just on demand. She's very skilled.
It was a great hat too. I had a monocle, had little bunny ears. Because I just kept adding to it because the spew of bullshit kept coming. So I'm like, well, I'll use the time wisely. And I did. And I stand by it. I'm sorry, Gremloe.
I'll give the sub to whichever chatter can guess who I'm cosplaying right now.
Every Republican Twitter profile picture in a car.
You need a American flag behind you, and then it's
Galaxy. I think it's okay. That person.
I got you.
The way you sound.
My don't tread on me. Get out! Oh my god! Oh,
no step on snake.
Yeah, I had that 11-year-old who I was teaching communism to design my don't step snake flag.
Don't step snake. I have a I know we're about to go, and I also I have to eat, but in our dining room I have a framed photo on our gallery wall where it's a bunch of the actual names of animals, and snake is Danger Noodle.
Danger Noodle's a great name.
Yeah, I love that.
Oh, and then and a crocodile is a danger log, or no, violent log, or
a murder log.
All of the
murder
above.
Log. Thank you. It's murder log.
Also, nope rope for snakes.
Nope rope.
Yeah, nope rope.
Oh, and then a platypus is duck puppy. Duck puppy.
And
I remember just laughing, and I've had that same. Yes, they're venomous, and they're the only mammal that are born out of an egg, right? They hatch out of an egg, so they don't give live birth. Yeah.
Yeah.
And they're so cute. If you've seen video of little platypuses, swimming around, they're freaking adorable. But they're venomous. So
proof that God makes mistakes.
Oh, I can tell you all about that.
This was awesome.
Yeah, I really enjoyed this, you guys.
Yeah.
So now that we're publicly available, what are we thinking for when we want to meet again?
I mean, I think everybody's a little bit more busy than I am. I'm generally available whenever.
I mean, look, this time next week, I should be available. And I'll let you know, because I can't plan any work travel until people are back from the holiday break, and this week is kind of dead week, so I'll have a much better idea post this week. But normally, as long as we can do it on Thursdays, or if we want to shake it up, really go nuts, we could find another day. But yeah, man, I want to let's please keep doing this. This is feeding my sanity with talking with people who give a shit and aren't just well, but have you considered? Well, but have you considered, ma'am? It's just. I thank you also for not talking down to me as a woman on the representing person on the platform.
What?
I can't fucking tell you. I can't fucking tell you how many times I've been condescended to, or people just talking over me, and I'm just
that's a lot.
It gets exhausting.
That's a lot.
So
this could also that could also be a segment where we extract people from that side of Twitch one by one and deprogram them out of that mentality.
Ooh,
that'd be very ambitious.
That's ambitious.
Very ambitious, but I'm
believe.
intrigued.
Yeah.
we can talk about it behind the scenes.
Oh yeah.
All right.
All
All
right,
right, I
guys.
think we could probably go ahead and part ways. Thank you both thank you all three of you, I should say, for dedicating almost 3 hours of your time to a very
Really?
robust discussion.
Oh my god.
Yeah, we've been here for a bit. We camped out.
I'm gonna
And that's
post
the
the
sign of a
VOD
good conversation.
tomorrow.
Yeah, awesome. I think you're gonna put it on your YouTube, right?
Yeah, I'm gonna post on the YouTube if that's cool with everybody.
Totally.
Cool with me.
Awesome.
Cool. All right, we'll be in touch about future topics, and to any of the professionals, at least that I see lurking in my chat and hopefully some of the other chats, the Ministry of Science is not static. We can easily rotate people in or out as need be to accommodate schedules. So we want to welcome more of our working professionals, credentialed or otherwise, into the Ministry of Science. Thank you all very much for being here and for hanging out with us for the 3-hour time period.
Thanks, guys.
All right, guys. See you later.
Bye.
Adios, friends.